Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us online here to the 5th European Crowdfunding Network's CrowdCamp, today on the topic of sustainable finance. Most of you will be dialing in from home, some of you from the office. We had intended to hold a meeting in physical form, but due to the health situation, we decided to make it online. And now I'm here in Prague with Ron Given, whom I will introduce in a second to you. And we will hold it online. It's the first time for us, so please bear with us in case we make mistakes, though the technical setup here is superior. Before we start, some technical things and some aspects on the agenda. We won't make any coffee breaks, but we will allow you to provide questions to us in the sense that we will blend in an email address on the bottom where you can send your questions directly to the tech room here, and then from there we will receive the relevant questions and then can pass them on to the keynote speakers or the panelists later on. We also invited those of you that had registered through our website on Monday, an invite to a discussion forum where you actually can exchange with each other, where you can also argue and have a real discussion and a networking experience. So I hope you also use that. Otherwise, I think this is all for the technical setup. We will dial in our speakers later on. You will see them on the screen behind us, and we will have a nice chat, I think. The European CrowdCamp today deals with sustainable finance with a focus on crowdfunding. We do a number of events as a network of industry practitioners in the crowdfunding series industry. This is one of them, and so we want to tackle a little bit the future of crowdfunding here, and how we can help make the world more sustainable, which is, of course, in the current times, an even more important issue than it may have been in the past. I'm Oliver Geider, speaking on behalf of the European Crowdfunding Network. I now introduce you to Ron Given from Deloitte. Ron, thank you very much for joining me here today.
Well, thank you very much, Oliver. My name is Ron Given, and on behalf of Deloitte, I'd like to welcome all of you to the 5th ECN CrowdCamp, which Deloitte has been very, very pleased to join with you and your group, Oliver, in co-organizing. As Oliver has said, we really would much prefer to have all of you here with us in beautiful Prague today, if that would have been possible, but it's not. But we have done everything that we can to make this virtual experience as good a substitute as we can. Believe me, there are many people on the other side of the camera that have been working with Oliver and me to make sure that everything goes just right, and I'm sure it will. And although we won't have any coffee breaks, they're watching us, Oliver. We're not watching them.
Yes.
So please feel free to take a coffee break if you need during the course of the day. But I think you'll see, because I also know this for sure, that we've put together 3 days of really meaty topics and terrific speakers. I think it's going to be hard to work yourself away from your screen. And the one thing I'm also positive that you'll find that these are 3 days that have been a great investment of your time. Now, at Deloitte, we're all into sustainable finance, the climate agenda, and ESG generally in Central Europe, Central and Western Europe, and globally. We've been there since the very beginning of this discussion that has now become so important to our clients in the financial, industrial, and public sectors, including many in the community that Oliver represents and the ECN represent. And we are today actively engaged with clients on this agenda globally, including many assignments in Central Europe. Our work calls upon the resources of all of our service lines: audit and assurance, consulting, risk advisory, financial advisory, including forensics, and tax and legal where I'm from, and our ability to collaboratively manage these teams to advance our clients' interests. Understanding business and its concerns, and being close to clients and their trade groups, as well as key governmental and regulatory authorities, positions Deloitte uniquely, we believe, to not only help our clients deal with this agenda, but to also help shape it in a positive way. I'm particularly happy that Rafael Rudzki, based in Warsaw and one of the key players in Deloitte's sustainable finance team, will be presenting a keynote to you tomorrow. Now, Oliver and I believe that if there was ever a time to be talking about sustainable finance, this has really got to be it. This is surely it. A core objective of this entire undertaking is resiliency. And boy, I think we've all had a crash course in the importance of resiliency these last few months. So we've got lots of things to do, Oliver.
Thank you. That is right. So before we move on to our next speaker in about 20 minutes, who's being onboarded, I would like to maybe recap a little bit what the expectations for some of our listeners are. We received some emails from you, we received some comments where you ask us what you want to hear. We also have a program which you can see online. So today we focus a little bit on the way the policy is looking at it and at sustainable finance and how crowdfunding can be involved in it. And we look at how crowdfunding platforms and market players actually tackle sustainable finance. And if they're ready for this, if this is really a scalable sector or if the potential is there. But let us go back a bit. Crowdfunding for most of us is still fairly young, even though it's around for about 10 years now. We had, in Europe at least, a fairly hard time in order to scale industry. We relied on national regulation. We relied on platforms that operated usually within their national frameworks. And we discussed these issues with the European Commission and the European Parliament early on, and they were very, very positive in engaging with the industry and developing a regulation that will allow European crowdfunding platforms to operate across Europe. And we are lucky that the Commission drove this development very fast, extremely fast actually in policy terms for how Brussels usually works, and submitted a proposal about 2 years ago, which has been now discussed in and out and agreed between the European Commission, the Council and the Parliament, and I'm sure we hear some of the details later on in our first two keynote speaks. The key point is, of course, that we expect the European Parliament to sign off on this piece of legislation still this year, so it will become applicable across Europe as of next year. A point where crowdfunding platforms dealing in financial services, so lending to businesses and equity participation to businesses, will finally be able to operate out of one European country and serve investors as well as companies across Europe. So this, I think, is a key aspect in the development of the crowdfunding platform that will see the development of European champions over the next 5 years. We will see competition, we will see niche models developing, but it's something that should be very exciting. This is a development that has, of course, been going on for 7 years now and involved hundreds of participants from all over Europe. I mean, even organizations like Deloitte were involved in the discussions on national level everywhere. So this is something that has really captured, I think, the spirit of a community of an industry that wants to grow and wants to do something good. And one of the key promises that we always argued is that crowdfunding is basically a citizen engagement form. It brings the opinion of the citizens to making decisions better. And when we talk about sustainable finance or sustainability, then of course the opinions of the citizens, where we should develop what and what are important aspects, become more and more significant. And I think this is where crowdfunding can even more in the future be a tool to deliver the goals that we set now within the European Green Deal. And I think it should be made incredibly clear to policymakers, but also to market actors, that if we want to successfully roll this out, there needs to be a cooperation, there needs to be a dialogue. It cannot end at some point. We need to continuously be involved in this.
And it's a confirmation that the population is supporting the goals set by the governments.
Yes, and it's also a way for the population to put new goals up.
Yes, yes.
And so this is things we've seen, and we've seen in national settings in member states where this was taken into account through specific tax incentives or regulation on renewable energy developments, where crowdfunding or other co-investments become a must if you want to develop these things. Yes. So this is a step in developing democracy,
Yeah.
I think.
And an important way of financing smaller concerns, right? I mean, smaller enterprises.
For now, I think, yes. We see that mostly small and sometimes medium-sized enterprises use crowdfunding to finance their transactions. We've also seen business models or crowdfunding platforms finance only a small part of a large transaction next to a bank or another investor. And so the buy-in here from the citizens that might be concerned about the development, that is, I think, the value add we can take from this. And so this, of course, is the importance of today's discussions as well, when we hear from the policy side how much they've understood and integrated this, but also hear from the industry the political responsibility that the industry has itself.
People are voting with their money.
They do, they do. We also have 2 other days of programs. Tomorrow will be quite interesting as well. We will inform you about this in the evening as well. But tomorrow we will talk about how it is actually being done. So examples of how sustainable finance and crowdfunding work together, and examples of how policy institutions can support this successfully and with direct involvement. And on the last day, we want to look a bit on what we can learn from other markets. The capital markets, for example, have developed over the last, I would say, 20 years, a clear agenda of how to deal with impact investing and sustainable development goals. And so there are lessons learned for our small industry regarding to measuring impact, regarding the monitoring, regarding to investor protection and consumer protection. Some of these aspects are still very, very young in our industry. So I think if we take these 3 days together, we have a very interesting day ahead of us, or days ahead of us, and I'm looking forward to that discussion.
As am I.
Yeah. Ron, so you work with a large corporate advisory within different services, and you already mentioned that sustainable finance has been a focus for your company. How do you see this develop, and how do you see your role as, let's say, Deloitte, in also supporting a small sector like crowdfunding?
Well, I'm currently with Deloitte Legal. I've been with large law firms as well. And I have to say, sustainable finance and ESG generally is sort of on the top of everybody's feed these days in the legal business, seeing as an important issue that we all need to be aware of, really being driven by the client side, but indicating that it's an important thing ahead. At Deloitte, a nice thing about the operation is that it's not only legal, but the other advisory groups that are involved in it, attempting to give the entire package of services that might be related to these issues. But there's no doubt about it, it is a train that's gaining speed and it's coming down the track for all of us.
I think it has actually been accelerated, you mentioned it earlier, incredibly in the last 3 months.
Yes.
Because a few years back, sustainability often ranged around, energy issues, environmental protection, and sometimes, workers' rights or social equality. And with the COVID epidemic, we've seen real impact on people's lives, and we now need to take drastic actions to save our society, economy. And so the small part that crowdfunding can play here, we've already seen that in the past few months, that many crowdfunding platforms developed specific approaches to help small enterprises or initiatives during the time.
Yes.
And we've also seen that there was a real need from the society to engage in these things.
To do it quickly.
Quickly, no questions asked, and really to the point, which usually large organizations or large programs can't develop.
Yes.
We also know from our work with our platforms, we published a survey on this on our website, that the COVID crisis has a significant impact on crowdfunding platforms in times of funds being made available for investment, as well as projects asking for funds because of the uncertainty. So crowdfunding platforms themselves have to deal also with that situation. But I think overall, we're looking quite positive into the future here. And we've also had yesterday in the US, we are from the US, the funeral of George Floyd, which brings another aspect which right now concerns millions of people worldwide that are on the street demonstrating,
Yes.
which is on equality and which is also an aspect of a sustainable future.
Absolutely.
And so I think we see more and more of these aspects popping up, and we will see them for the rest of the year as well being discussed in Brussels, be it agricultural reforms, be it social equality within Europe, be it investment in energy or into other sustainable development goals, urban development. These are all aspects that all come back to this point of how do we fund something that is not only profit-driven, but that is driven with a positive value creation for a common good.
And the one thing that you can really feel when you're working among the professionals, I think particularly the younger professionals involved in this area, is that they like it. They like being involved for things for the good.
Absolutely. I think that is a trend we've seen the latest with the millennials, or at least that's been talked about. We also see that our work reflects on this. So it's also on our website. We've done a study, or helped on a study for the European Institute of Technology, a climate kick, on urban development, specifically how crowdfunding can be used to retrofit buildings in a sustainable way. Mm-hmm. And so we already see that there's a lot of small niches that take this potential and want to exploit it. And for the market, that means there are uncounted opportunities to expand. For me, and this is, I think, what we need to discuss a bit as well with our keynotes and our panelists is how can we make this happen, from at home, from your computer, from running your business, running a crowdfunding platform, being a policymaker, being an advisor, in a coherent way, in a structured way, so that we can derive policies and policy actions, and at the same time, private engagement and investment to reach the same goals. So
exciting stuff.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also have on our website, I believe, a survey right now, and there will be a webinar on sustainable finance-related issues under the project called Comets, which we run with a number of partners. So the interested people can have a look at our website and find some things out. It's called www.eurocrowd.org. We try to engage with as many stakeholders as possible. So if you want to be involved, you can get in touch there as well. If you think about how to move forward, Ron, I mean, you've got some experience behind your belt. You've seen a number of things. Many people that are engaged in these activities are maybe not quite as experienced yet. It's a long path. I will retire before we reach the end of it.
Maybe you. Speak for yourself.
Yes, you not. But so I think it's a long path. This is the kind of thing. So do you have some advice when you think about people that are now out there that will speak later today that are full of enthusiasm, full of energy? How do you approach such a long stretch in a positive way?
Well, I think part of it is educational. Part of it is what we're doing today, bringing the topic to people with a better understanding some of the terminology, which is happening actually faster in Europe than in the United States, where you're coming to common terminology on what's sustainable, what qualifies as good ESG investments, and so forth. But I think it is educating others, educating yourself, and being prepared for the opportunities, and then watching the market. I mean, I think all of us, particularly, I have noticed in the last several months, the public disclosure documents, particularly of American concerns, English, which I can read. There's a lot more focus on ESG. But it will be a long march. I mean, it's not. I think we've all grown very accustomed to the financial metrics being everything for things. It'll be an educational process. But I think every indication is that the market is changing. I think COVID-19 has probably helped in unexpected ways of people seeing that there's more to it than just the dollars and cents or the euros and cents.
Yeah. education is I actually think it's a difficult topic we need to address as well. We won't quite get to it in this event. I hope that some of the speakers can maybe share some insight. We're talking about crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is reward-based crowdfunding, so it's basically you give money for product in return or service or some other non-financial return, but it's often around financial services, lending or equity investments. And the European regulation that is coming up deals with equity investments and lending. And the aspect around education within the financial services sector, when it comes to consumer, called financial literacy, is appallingly low all over Western Europe and the US.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I think this will be one time that the law will be further ahead than the educated consumers of the law.
Yeah.
But you have to keep at it. And as I say, events like this and other events will be key to that.
I am sure. I'm just concerned that we have a low financial literacy rate, and now we are adding sustainability to it and potentially other goals. So I think the efforts here need to be doubled. And for Europe, this is on national level. The European Commission can only do as much, but this is something that needs to be taken incredibly serious in order to not only create nice programs and nice conferences and speeches, but in order to achieve goals at the end, we need to implement consumer protection, financial education, sustainability education, potentially already at school level.
Yeah. Well, but I also think, Oliver, that as more and more of us see the real effects of climate change and so forth, there'll be a motivation to become educated.
That I'm sure, and we've seen the impact Greta Thunberg had. Yeah. I mean, I can report from my own kids that they started reading Greta Thunberg books at the age of 10. Yeah. So there is certainly something that will drive the discourse amongst younger generations for the future to come. And so that is also what I think makes me quite positive about the development of the market.
We should be.
We should be. So we have about 8 minutes to go before our next speaker comes on, Martin, who should be currently doing his testing, so we hope he will be there. Until then, I would like to repeat for those that don't know, we have a screen here. We can see if you send us questions. They will pop up here. Feel free to send them at any time. Make them polite and relevant to the discussion. And then we can feed them to our speakers and they can directly answer to you. Or if they are addressed to us, we can maybe repeat them to you as well. And for those that are on the chat room, please also develop your own discourse. And we monitor the same and we will see what the outcome is in here as well. So that's on that level. Is there anything that interests you about crowdfunding, what you haven't captured yet going forward?
Well, I think I'm of course moderating a panel, and we've in our preparations for our discussion today, I asked them the question. I'm going to ask them again today: is sustainability a push or a pull for them? Are they reacting to a market or creating a market? And I'm not going to give away the answer to that, but that dynamic has been very important to me, very interesting to me, and I think everyone will come away from this understanding really the importance of the intermediaries in this whole process of making all of this work. I share your concerns about education and the literacy and all of that, but at least on the company side, and this is influenced, I mean, being in a place like Deloitte, of course, we're at the forefront of this, so I think I'm seeing the best of the best every day. But how quickly companies have responded to this need, taken it seriously, and preparing some pretty good disclosure information and really focus, a company focus. and that COVID-19, my first reaction to COVID-19 was, is this going to slow the progress? But I agree with you, Oliver. I think it's accelerated it in many ways.
Yes.
In a nice way, in a nice way. But it's this is certainly something that, in my view, will ask people this, is not a fad. And I think all of us have you to thank and your organization for a lot of the good work that you've been doing on this since the very, very beginning, particularly pushing on the law side.
Yeah, that's always down to our members that are engaging and really supporting our connections there.
But you've been heard.
We've been heard.
The evidence is there that you've been heard.
We've been heard, and I think here the thanks should go to the policymakers in Brussels and on member states to actually being willing to take a risk on a really young industry. The first time there were discussions, you couldn't even call it an industry, to have an open eye and then follow the process. I know, and this is not an official publicity, of course, but I know that within the Commission, this also sometimes is seen as very interesting, maybe a way of developing new policy frameworks, engaging much earlier than before, supporting the discourse, and then take the knowledge out of the market at a relevant time. So this for sure has driven our development.
So it's valuable to the policymakers too, a market test.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we've always had people from the European Commission and people from the European Parliament and other institutions engaging with us and our members, looking for information, and we've always tried to have an open and critical discourse. So not whitewashing, not saying it's all good if it isn't, or not threatening, but always trying to explain where we see the potential and where we see risks. And that is a fruitful way of working, and that has created, I think, a lot of trust, and that has given this market the opportunity to be regulated at a time where, if you look at the market dynamics, there's other areas in the fintech sector that are much bigger and much faster developing, but you don't have the understanding of the market. It's much more difficult to engage with them, and so this has helped the sector. Yes, I'm quite looking forward to this. I think you mentioned the response from your panelists that COVID will be a positive catalyst for the industry. I believe so as well. I believe that some of the platforms that may, shouldn't have been in the market will not survive this. And those that survive will come out stronger and will be able to refocus and redefine their activities. And with the regulation hopefully coming into force as of next year, I think the competition will even further develop this kind of refocusing of the sector, and we should see a fairly strong and significant market in the years to come, as we see already today in some countries like the UK or the US with the lending market, but also sometimes with the security markets in the UK. So there I'm pretty positive. Yes. Maybe one thing as well we've seen over the last 6 months, crowdfunding platforms that were operating within all legal frameworks in specific countries, but outside of the supervision. And we've seen them develop modi of operation that were not necessarily sustainable and not really consumer focused. And I'm actually quite pleased that in some of these cases, the investors have come together to co-organize themselves and take legal actions in order to claim their rights in this case. Also, this is a part of a healing process, and it helps to professionalize the sector. So I think all this comes at a really good time for us to move into the next year. And I think the policy focus on sustainability will give crowdfunding a kind of a drive to develop into a positive focus. So we are very lucky. We're now coming shortly up to our first keynote. Ron, thank you very much for being here with me. Thank you for staying here in the studio and moderating the panel later on.
My pleasure, Oliver.
It's a pleasure. We had a very nice dinner here yesterday. We could prepare a bit. And
if our audience would have come here, we would have had a dinner with all of them. But
yes, but unfortunately, that is we do this.
We can report that the meals being served in Prague now are pretty good, right?
They are outstanding,
and the beer is pretty good too.
Outstanding, very good beer from Bohemia, I believe it was. But next time we will revisit the idea of meeting here and discussing here.
Good, super.
So I think now is a good time to maybe close the opening and move on, and we should go now to our first keynote speaker.
Looking forward to it.
So, Martin, can you hear us?
I can hear you very well.
Hello, Martin.
Hello, Ron. Hello, Olivier.
Oh, Martin.
Thank you very much for joining us here virtually. Thank you for being available on short notice as well and taking your time with all the technical preparations. We have about 45 minutes that you can play as you want. You can give us a presentation, you can speak, you can ask us questions. We hope we can get some questions from the audience as well. There again, maybe please use the email address and send questions directly here so that we can ask Martin the questions on your behalf. And then I think afterwards we have a round of Q&A and see how it goes and a little chat. Are you calling out of the Commission right now in Brussels?
No, I'm calling actually from my bedroom. Normally I would have called you from my living room, but unfortunately today my living room was not available. I have 3 kids. So I hope that everything will work well. Many thanks for the invitation. It's a great opportunity to present to you our thinking about sustainable finance. I should say in the beginning that I'm very jealous. I'm Czech myself, that you had a great dinner in Prague last night and you enjoyed your beer. I've been in Brussels now for the last 3 months and I'm missing a little bit the Czech environment. I will start, I mean, we have prepared a set of slides that introduces you into the topics. I should say maybe begin in the beginning before I go into the substance that, as you know, for the Commission, both digitalization and sustainability are key priorities. And I used to be the head of unit in charge of the Capital Markets Union, and last year also of the head of unit dealing with both sustainable finance and fintech. And I think that there are hardly any files where the 2 perspectives of digitalization and sustainability can interact very nicely and where we can reap nice synergies between the 2 files. And you mentioned in your discussion the context of recovery. You mentioned the context of approaching also retail investors and connecting this agenda to people, facilitating access to finance to SMEs, financial literacy. I mean, all these issues are really on top of our agenda, and I will try to explain in the next 45 minutes that we are not only talking about these topics, but we are also doing a lot. I have prepared a few slides, so I will start. I will now try to switch it to them. I hope that you can see them.
Yes, works perfectly. Wonderful.
Excellent. Well, I intend to structure my presentation into 3 parts. You have been very generous with time. I mean, 45 minutes, that's really great. And of course, I would like to keep some time for questions. First, I will introduce you into the topic in terms of what has been achieved so far since the action plan on sustainable finance was adopted, was developed, and there has been a lot. So again, it will be a kind of quick crash course. Second, I will set the sustainable finance policy agenda into the context of the crisis and in particular in the context of the recovery. And I will say a few words about what the Commission is doing and how we think about the interaction between the recovery agenda and sustainability agenda. And finally, I will conclude by our thinking about the future, about how we should increase the ambition further. We have done a lot, but we should certainly not be complacent about what we have achieved. And one thing is what we do as policymakers, but the other thing is what stakeholders can do with those tools. So here, I mean, I will also outline a couple of hints or ideas that we are having where also crowdfunding or fintech or digitalization and sustainable finance can leverage on each other better than in the past. So very quickly, I know that this slide might be a bit overwhelming for those of you who are not familiar with sustainable finance, but this is it. I mean, this is explaining the scale of the ambition we are facing and also scale of the challenge and the scale of the work that we have done so far. The action plan on sustainable finance that we adopted as the Commission in 2018 had three main objectives. The first one was how to reorient capital flows towards sustainable investment. And the actions that you see on the left side, actions 1 to 5, are basically designed in a way that would move the trillions in the right direction. Here, we are talking about taxonomy. I will say a few words about that, given that it's really in the heart of our strategy. We are developing standards for the green bond. We are also developing an eco-label for financial products. Action number 3 is about how to marry better the public support and private investment, how to de-risk certain projects in the private sector. Action number 4 is about how to connect this agenda to retail investors. We are going to adopt shortly a legislative piece that will require investment advisors to ask retail clients about their preferences when they make investment decisions. And this action will be super important, not only to raise awareness about sustainable finance among retail investors, but also hopefully will increase the demand for sustainable products. And finally, action number 5, we have developed a methodology or framework for climate benchmarks and indices that would accelerate transition. On the right side, you see actions that are supposed to support the other 2 objectives. The second objective is how to make sure that the financial sector itself is resilient to the risks stemming from climate change and environmental degradation. Here I would maybe highlight action number 7, where we have proposed a legislative act requiring investors and financial market participants to disclose how they comply with their fiduciary duties, and investors who are claiming that they have sustainable products to demonstrate how they have reached this conclusion. Obviously, action number 8 is equally important, how to integrate ESG considerations into the prudential and regulatory frameworks for banks and insurance companies. The third and final objective of the action plan, and this is really a comprehensive vision that we presented 2 years ago, was to enhance transparency, not only of the financial sector, but also of the corporates, and how to foster long-termism and improvements in corporate governance. So I will say a few words about that in a minute. Before I go into the content, I should say that the scale of the challenge is enormous. The usual number that we are quoting officially in our publications is 260 billion euros every year in investment, in additional investment that are currently missing in order to meet the energy and climate targets. If you add the investment needs for the other broader environmental objectives, such as circular economy or biodiversity, prevention of pollution and water, you end up with additional 130. So if you add 260 and 130, you end up really with a very high number, almost $500 billion, which doesn't necessarily yet include other investment needs stemming from the Green Deal and the increased ambition under Green Deal. So it's clear that the public cannot service all these needs, and that's why the mobilization of the private capital is so important. I will say a few words about taxonomy. I've been asked again to give you a crash course about some of the key tools, and taxonomy is really in the heart of our strategy. Taxonomy is a classification system that would allow investors to have a better understanding which economic activities and which economic projects are substantially contributing to the environmental objectives that we have in mind, how to meet the goals. There are different investment strategies used and deployed by financial market participants, but the taxonomy so far is the only one that would really provide confidence and comfort to the investors and financial markets that what is compliant with taxonomy is really sustainable. Taxonomy is not a mandatory list to invest in. There has been quite a lot of anxiety that we are going to force financial sector to invest in those assets and divest from other assets. We have conceived this tool of taxonomy in the first place as a useful tool that should again accelerate transition. On the left side, what you see in bold, facilitating transition of polluting sectors This means that the taxonomy, at least as we are developing it, will not be the usual list of the green stuff that you would expect to see on the list, such as windmills and the usual stuff. But the taxonomy is really supposed to identify activities, economic activities in the key sectors of our economies that are currently polluting, that are currently highly emitting, but where the potential to reduce carbon emissions and reduce the environmental footprint is the most significant. So I will say a few words about that as well. So that reflects the ambition of this project. Very quickly, I mean, we have adopted the regulation not to force people to use it, like you have to invest in this and divest from that, but we developed this regulation in order to provide for a legal framework that would enhance transparency. The only requirement that we have imposed on the financial market participants and also big companies is to disclose how and whether they have used taxonomy. So again, it's about transparency. It's not about behavioral requirements, although we might at some point also explore how to increase the ambition of the project over time. We have defined 6 environmental objectives. You see them on the slide. And for obvious reasons, we have prioritized the first 2, climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, where the legal framework will be completed by the end of this year. I think that in your session, in your introductory debate, you mentioned that it would be important that co-legislators agree on everything we have proposed. I think that basically all the legislative proposals that we have adopted on sustainable finance have been already agreed, and we are just waiting for a final formal endorsement by the plenary of the European Parliament on the taxonomy proposal in June. So it's a done deal. It's there. There is a political backing. And now we have to just make sure that it's working on the ground. Very quickly, I mean, this slide just reminds ourselves of the importance that if we fix something on the climate side, we should not harm, let's say, the other 4 environmental objectives. So the whole concept of taxonomy has been designed on the concept of that a given activity must substantially contribute to one of the 6 environmental objectives, and at the same time must not significantly harm, so that if we fix something, we should not really create problems elsewhere. I should mention that we would never be able to develop these tools and frameworks alone as the European Commission. We are bureaucrats, we are policymakers, but we need a lot of expertise from the markets. And the strong partnership between the public sector and the private sector has been really a very important driving force for the success of the project. So shortly after the action plan was adopted, the European Commission set up so-called technical expert group on sustainable finance. I am the chair of that group, and I have to say that the experts that we have gathered around the table are really exceptional. They have been working over the last 2 years, day and night, on 4 issues. On developing the technical details of the climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation taxonomies. They have developed the first blueprint of the EU Green Bond Standard. They have developed all the technical work on the minimum requirements for climate benchmark. And they have also developed the details or guidance for corporates that are subject to the non-financial reporting directive. What kind of relevant information big corporates should disclose that would be relevant for investors. The work has been completed. The technical expert group presented all the work in spring. We had a big event in Brussels still before the confinement started. And now it's for the Commission to follow up on this work. The highlight that I would like to mention is the report on the taxonomy by the technical expert group. There are 2 big reports. One is on basically on the technical details, which is almost a 400 pages document, which provides basically the first blueprint of the list of economic activities in the various sectors that you see on the right side of this slide. And second, and that's very important, especially for the practitioners in the market, they have developed a very useful document, very clear and very comprehensive, that describes in a very simple language how taxonomy can be used in practice, and not only by the investors, but basically also by banks, by insurance companies, pension funds, as well as corporates. We are currently working also how to make this tool accessible for the SMEs, because we have been talking about the importance of financing SMEs. So we are looking at those usability issues of taxonomy very, very seriously.
Thank you very much. There was just a question here exactly to that regard, if the taxonomy is applicable to SMEs, but I think you just answered it, that you're working on it.
Well, in terms of regulatory requirement, there is nothing that requires SMEs to go through these 400 pages. I mean, that still have to be translated into EU law. That would be a nightmare, obviously. That's not something that we would like to impose, and that is not anywhere in the legislative framework. The only two requirements that are agreed politically are, again, for financial market participants that are investors, essentially, that are selling products as environmentally sustainable. They have to disclose whether and how they have used taxonomy. So that's the first requirement. And the second requirement is for big companies, big listed companies that are subject to the so-called non-financial reporting directive, which we have more than 6,000 companies in Europe, who would also have to be asked, who would have to disclose whether and how some of their activities that they are carrying out are on the taxonomy list or complying with the criteria. The second requirement was super important for the ability of the financial sector to comply with the first one, because you cannot obviously ask the financial sector to disclose something on something that they don't have information. So it's a big project. This was introduced by the European Parliament, and now the impact of this tool will obviously be felt across the sectors, not only the financial sector, but in the right way. That's why also I have prepared this slide, which reminds ourselves that, again, the taxonomy should be a useful tool in the first place, and not only necessarily as the tool that should harass everyone, and if you are not fully compliant, you are bad, but rather as a tool that can measure progress of not only the financial sector, but also of the companies meeting the criteria that are set out in the taxonomy. Because at the end of the day, if you all are serious about all these targets that the European Union is talking about, and we in the European Commission are very serious, at some point these targets have to be translated into concrete actions. And we as policymakers have to provide both investors and the businesses with the right tools. And this is yet again an example of a possible useful tool, and we believe very useful tool, that both businesses and financial sector can use for their transition. Again, not only in the sectors that are already green, but in particular in the sectors that are currently highly polluting. And you can also have a company, just to give you an example, that is producing a cement, and we will need cement. So there is no intention to penalize companies that are highly emitting, but we need to provide them with a possibility to replace their existing technology by another one, which would significantly reduce the carbon emission. And you can still produce cement with a lot of savings in carbon terms. So this is exactly what the taxonomy is doing, and offers a number of great opportunities, not only for the financial sector, but also for the businesses across all these sectors. I will not go into the details of the EU Green Bond Standard. This is a very promising instrument that is already being used, but is basically scattered using different standards and using different methodologies. There are already very well established market practice, and we have seen a big surge in the demand for the green bonds, also in the issuance by sovereigns. But the purpose of the EU Green Bond Standard would be to have obviously as much leverage on the existing best market practices, but a link with the EU taxonomy, because at the end of the day, determining what is substantially contributing to environmental goals will need to play a role for the EU Green Bond Standard. I will not go into the details of the climate benchmark. This is yet another tool that, again, investors are not forced to use. In case you are an investor who would like to have an index of stocks that are either already climate neutral today, which is very difficult to find, which is the EU Paris aligned benchmark. If you also are an investor that is interested in having a basket of stocks or invest into an index that would allow you to reduce the carbon emissions of those sectors, of those companies over time, the EU climate transition benchmark would be precisely for you. So here we call it that you are on a diet and you have to basically reduce your carbon emissions more than 7% year on year. Very quickly, I mean, I already talked about the corporate reporting, the importance of transparency by the sector. We are very well aware of the importance of minimizing the regulatory burden. What we have done so far, we have updated the guidelines that support the non-financial reporting directive and provided clarity to big listed companies what kind of relevant information in terms of climate would be useful for investors. And here, I mean, we have not only incorporated the work of the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate Disclosure under the Financial Stability Board, which incorporates the risks stemming from climate on the companies, but in Europe we have gone further and we have also incorporated the impact of the companies on climate and environment. So there are two channels, two ways. Now I'm aware that I'm going now into too much details. I still would like to talk about the future, but this was just to show to you how much and how rich the agenda is. This slide, I will be very happy if you are interested, if you can circulate them. This gives you a hint about the next milestones when it comes to the legislative proposals and the upcoming legislative action on our side. Maybe the key one is December 2020, which is this year. We will adopt in Europe, in the European Commission, the first batch of taxonomy on climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. So investors who would like to make a difference, they can already start using those tools as they stand. So this has been an overview of the progress achieved so far. It's a lot. This is obviously not only progress achieved by the European Commission. This is progress achieved by member states, by stakeholders. We are very encouraged about all the positive developments going on the ground. But I would like to mention, obviously, the current context. And the current context is the crisis that nobody expected, which has clearly underscored the links between human activity and the multiple ecological crises that we are facing. And I guess that I don't have to talk about this for too long, although even in my own country, there are still some deniers of the climate change developments. I think that there is a consensus that these issues are really very important, and the links between the different crises should make us very worried. There have been a number of packages adopted either by member states or the European Union to respond to the crisis. Obviously, it was important to act very quickly. But now when we approach the recovery phase, it's extremely important to start thinking about what kind of investments we would like to support. And that's basically what this slide says. I have to say that I am working on sustainable finance every day. And during March and April, and maybe also still in the beginning of May, we heard some views and propositions by some stakeholders that let's first sort out the problems of the crisis and let's leave the sustainability agenda for later. The argument was sustainability is expensive. Sustainability is about the long-term targets. Let's sort out let's resolve this current crisis, and only then, once we remedy everything, let's deal with sustainability again. And here I have to say that the Commission cannot disagree more with those views. On the contrary, we believe that there is no trade-off between the speed of the economic recovery and supporting the sustainability transition. And not only my president, von der Leyen, but also my executive vice president, Dombrovskis, and other commissioners were very clear about the need to make sure that the recovery is green, just, and resilient. And that, in a way, the recovery should accelerate the green agenda, and vice versa, green agenda should accelerate the recovery. in the three blocks that you see on the slide, there are three aspects that have kind of changed the landscape of the sustainable finance, at least the way how I feel about it. I think that we have seen that we need to work harder on the resilience of not only the financial system, but of our economies. Second, given all these massive interventions from the public sector and member states, and now also the European Union, we need to make sure that these investments are kind of aligned or these are in sync with the investments that we would like to see from the private sector. So kind of we have to make sure that we marry better the way how public spending is done and how private investments are being encouraged. And finally, I have mentioned that we have worked very hard on especially the E aspect of sustainability, on the environmental issues and climate aspects. But this crisis has clearly shown that we need to do a bit better and more on the other two letters of ESG, which is social and governance. I will not go into the details here. This is the package that the Commission adopted on the 27th of May, which is really supposed to restart the growth and the economy of the whole European Union. And not only as a whole, but in the first place also support those that have been disproportionately hit. I think that you also talked about inequalities and all that, and I think that we need to ensure that there is not only a coherence in the green agenda in the European Union, but also coherence in the social agenda, and that we cannot let those who have been hit particularly badly behind. So I will not go into that. Maybe the second pillar is obviously the most relevant for the private investors. And here I really would like to emphasize the great opportunities that this package, and not only this package, but also other packages adopted by member states offer, because these stimulus packages had not been foreseen before the crisis. Now they are there, and they can, in a way, trigger additional positive actions by the private sector and by the financial sector. Very quickly, I mean, this is basically a summary of the key document that was adopted on the 27th of May, which was the key communication on how the European Green Deal should support recovery. There were very important references, and not only references, but clearly underlying the importance of sustainable finance agenda, and in particular the importance of EU taxonomy guiding investments in the right direction in the recovery context. There has been also an announcement on a new initiative on sustainable corporate governance. I talked about the G letter, and obviously there have been some high-level principles introduced to ensure that the public support is provided in line with the Green Deal and not undermine it. So, I mean, this is just to give you a political context. I'm sure that the following keynote speaker will talk about the politics of the recovery package in more depth. Now, finally, this is really the core of my presentation, the sustainable finance strategy, why we are shifting the gear to a higher pace and higher ambition. The renewed sustainable finance strategy was announced last year in December when the Green Deal communication was published by the Commission. And the financing of the Green Deal is really a very critical element of it. So you see the different angles of the Green Deal and how the sustainable finance strategy contributes to meeting the different policy targets and goals. Before I go into the content of what we intend to do in the future, maybe a few words about the process. We launched a public consultation on the renewed sustainable finance strategy in the beginning of April, which will run until 15th of July. And the strategy itself will be adopted before the end of the year. We envisage approximately November or December. And this will be the flagship document, the flagship visionary roadmap for all the actions and other initiatives that the Commission and other stakeholders should take in this area. Now, I mean, maybe very quickly, why we are shifting the gear to a higher pace and higher ambition. You might argue you have done a lot, you have legislated a lot. Shouldn't you leave us in peace? Well, not necessarily. I have to say that not only this agenda is, of course, there are some legislative pieces, but this agenda in the first place is trying to be enabling agenda. like the whole fintech agenda as well. And maybe the first reason why the increase of ambition is needed is that the Green Deal increased the ambition of the different, not only climate targets, but also other environmental targets. So if you kind of listen to the numbers that I presented to you, if you see the targets and if you see the progress that has been achieved on the ground, and I have to say that we are encouraged very much by the progress achieved so far, but these elements do not really add up. So we do need to explore avenues how to do better, not only at the public sector level, but also how to mobilize other partners, other stakeholders that have not yet been mobilized properly. And by the way, I mean the potential to connect this agenda to retail investors and citizens has not been exploited yet. The second consideration why we are increasing the ambition is that the origin of sustainable finance was really about how to green finance, how to green the financial sector. But in light of these targets and the transition challenges, we are moving more and more towards how to make sure that the financial sector supports the businesses, households, companies, citizens on the transition. And there is a very, very important role that the financial sector can and should play, and in many cases is already playing, maybe not sufficiently yet, but we need to explore again more how to finance green than necessarily only green finance. And finally, I already mentioned it, this crisis has clearly shown the need to reinforce resilience of our systems, and the more sustainable financial system we have, the better degree of resilience we will achieve. We launched this public consultation in the beginning of April. I'm aware that there are plenty of topics that need to be explored, but we obviously we didn't want to disclose yet what we are thinking about because we were not yet ready. The purpose of the consultation is to gather feedback from all relevant stakeholders that are interested. But we suggested to structure the feedback and the debate into 3 clusters. I will start with the second point that you see on the slide, which is about how to strengthen the foundations of sustainable investment. Here we talk about transparency, sustainability ratings, and other tools. Second cluster is about how to maximize the impact and opportunities that this agenda should have, and maybe has not yet been exploited, on citizens, investors, companies, on our society. And finally, apart from the impact and opportunities, we should also explore better the risks, how the climate risks and environmental degradation risks impact not only individual institutions, but what it means in terms of systemic risks. And this crisis has clearly shown that there is some work to be done. My last 4 slides will take you through very quickly through some of the key topics that we are exploring in our consultation. And if there is a please do submit your feedback. The first area, the first cluster, is about the foundations. I already talked about corporate reporting, the sustainability research, corporate governance, long-termism, investor engagement, possible standards and labels. There are many specific questions in this area that I would leave it to you to review. I would like to focus maybe with you, especially on the second cluster, which is how to increase the opportunities and the impact of the various actions and tools for citizens, investors, and companies. And here I would like to mention 3 aspects. And the first one is mobilizing retail investors and citizens. I think that there you talked about financial literacy, about again the reaping the potential of crowdfunding to also allow people to make an impact with their own savings on the ground, and they don't have to only go to the streets and protest, but that they kind of feel that they are making a positive impact also in their local communities and in local regions. We are not requesting anybody, I mean, in a small village in the Czech Republic to necessarily, sponsor a very big project in the European or Union and somewhere else. I mean, there can be very clear examples of projects that have a direct impact on society in the regions and in the local context. Also, the drought, I mean, in the Czech Republic, I mean, it's not really an area that should be completely omitted. And climate issue is one thing, but again, the other four environmental objectives need to be taken very seriously. The second aspect that I would like to mention is the digital sustainable finance. This is, for me, actually one of the hobby horses that I have myself in the team. I talked about the synergies between digitalization agenda and sustainability agenda. And I think that the financial sector has already done a great job there. And we as policymakers really need to articulate how some of the best practice and how the best impactful examples can be extrapolated to a much larger scale. And there, I mean, I really would like to ask you for a particularly serious and substantial input from your side, because I do believe that especially the fintech and crowdfunding communities have a lot to say here. So I would really rely on you here. I will not say more. I mean, I have some ideas myself, but it's always better if we hear them from stakeholders who have more and better expertise. And finally, incentives to scale up sustainable investments and project pipeline, I mean, they come together in a way. We need to make sure, again, that people also see the impact of the tools and frameworks on the ground. I mean, we cannot develop these tools in our Brussels offices and expect people that they would be happy with it. They need to see, what good it brings. So we need to think collectively with member states and the European Parliament how we can de-risk certain projects that the private sector would normally not carry out itself, and how to create the right project pipeline, even for the smaller projects, and how to again involve the SMEs into these projects and ideas. Maybe, I mean, the last point that is obviously relevant is I mentioned all these public stimulus and the public interventions. We are really exploring very hard how, for instance, taxonomy and the green bonds that we are now encouraging everybody to use can be also used by the public sector, by the European Union itself, by the Commission, and by member states. And there is a lot of interest in this topic because this alignment will be absolutely crucial. My final slide, that's about the risk side. We are here not only about the credit rating agencies and making sure that sustainability considerations are mainstream in the way how credit risks are assessed, but also how the banks and insurance companies are managing the risks stemming from environmental and climate degradation. And of course, I talked about the resilience. So I think that, I mean, this is obviously a very, very important topic. I mentioned that we need to look at it from the systemic point of view, not only from the point of view of individual institutions. My final slide, and I will promise that after that I will finish, is about the international dimension. The European Union, yes, I mean, we have been in the forefront of promoting sustainable finance in the European Union, and there is a full backing of all member states to do that. But there are some jurisdictions in the world who are doing the same, and who are also developing tools and frameworks, who are also developing taxonomies and thinking very hard with the financial sector, crowdfunding platforms, how to mainstream sustainability in the financial sector agendas. And we have decided that we would create a forum with those countries where we can discuss collectively who is doing what and how to ensure convergence between the different tools and frameworks. We believe it will be unfortunate if in 5 years' time, investors who have global activities that may be not that relevant for the crowdfunding platforms, but for investors that have global activities would end up with different standards and different tools that will be completely inconsistent with each other. So this platform that we set up and we are running as the European Commission in the form of secretariat is now representing half of global emissions, half GDP, and these countries are vetted to be very serious about promoting this agenda further. My final point on this this crisis, and again, obviously, sustainability agenda is not relevant only for the developed countries, but also for the developing countries and emerging markets. And usually, these countries have been badly hit in this crisis. So we are also developing some ideas and thoughts for which, by the way, crowdfunding can be useful as well. How sustainable finance and how we can mobilize capital and the power of finance to support emerging markets and developing countries, not only in terms of recovery, but on their transition path. So yes, the perspective of the developing countries is very, very important. I have been very, very exhaustive, possibly. I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I will be very happy to answer them.
That was a terrific presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. Very, very detailed, very, well structured. So I think our audience could hopefully follow. I mean, we could here follow quite well. Just a point when you ask for the feedback to the questionnaire on sustainable finance, we have a working group that is supposed to develop some answers. They are listening in. Some of them will be on the panel in half an hour. So I hope that you at least get from them relevant input. We have also received some questions. For those that still have questions and haven't answered them, there is an email address that should be on the bottom of the screen visible for you, where you can send your questions, and then we can see them here. Martin, from the audience, there was already a question that is a bit more on the longevity of policy within the Commission. If you now go into developing this fantastic Green Deal and focus on sustainable finance, we just have a new Commission that is now in charge for the next 5 years. What is the time horizon? Will this be still around in 10 years or 20 years? I mean, you had goals of 2050 there, but what gives us the comfort to say, if we now invest in this and if we really support this, this will be there in 30 years. There will not be a policy shift within the European Commission or the Brussels institutions.
Well, you are right. I mean, that priorities are changing from one Commission to another, and we have seen it in the past. In case of sustainability and in case of climate and sustainability more broadly, this agenda will never go away. I personally think it will be the opposite. I am obviously a very optimistic person, and I think that we are making, again, a great progress. But if you read the science and if you read the scientific research, the situation is pretty bad. And I believe that the agenda will only increase in its importance even after this Commission, precisely because I don't want to now for the picture, because the challenge will kind of multiple about climate change only, and then separately talk about the environmental degradation, and then separately about resilience, and separately about COVID and other viruses. The problem might be, and we have to assume that some of these crises might, interact and might aggravate the impact. And I don't want to again sound as a kind of devil's advocate or kind of being pessimistic, but we will need to accelerate and increase the ambition of this agenda over time. To give you a comfort why this agenda will not go away, you have seen the Commission didn't adopt communications. We also adopted a proposal for climate law that enshrines the commitment to achieve climate neutrality in the European Union by 2050. The law is currently, or the proposal is currently being negotiated with member states and the parliament, but this law will provide for a certainty that the agenda will not go away. And again, we are talking only about the climate law yet. I mean, we have to talk about the other 4 environmental objectives and other SDG sustainability issues. Yeah. So again, I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but since you asked me whether you think that this agenda would go away, I suspect it will not. And I rather suspect it will come with a greater force.
Yeah. And of course, you're right. I mean, we as the citizens can also keep it on the agenda. Crowdfunding is on its 3rd commission now, so that is already something if a small topic like this can survive that long, then I think sustainability can as well. We're at the end of the time. There was another question about, and maybe you can just hint us if we can find information on this on your website. Is there any data that you have that shows that companies that adopt such taxonomies, that they have better results financially long term, that they come out better? Do we have any back data on this where people can say this is actually worthwhile for me to do?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there is a plenty of evidence showing that ESG investments have scored much better during the crisis than other investments. Also, when it comes to the renewables, I mean, you can see, I mean, there are many, I mean, of course, everything has been bad, very, very badly, but investments that have been pursuing sustainability considerations have normally scored better than the average investments. There is a plenty of evidence about it. I can send you some examples. Obviously, we have not yet tested how the EU taxonomy would work, because the EU taxonomy still, again, is in the making, but it will be ready in 6 months' time. But again, taxonomy is a tool that will, be the cherry on the cake that will tell you how significant your contribution to environmental objectives is. But you can deploy other strategies. And what is really important, that investments that have broad sustainability perspective enshrined in the products or in the considerations really have scored better. So I have been a little bit allergic to those statements that there is a kind of always clear trade-off between return and sustainability. There are more and more products and more examples, and not only scattered or sporadic, where you can really see a trend that if financial sector and if businesses consider sustainability more seriously in their business strategies, ultimately it pays off.
Thank you very much, Martin. Look, Martin, we are at the end of our time. That was a really good contribution. Thank you very much for your hints. If you have some data, maybe you can share it. Maybe we can feed it also tomorrow into the conference. But otherwise, I'm sure that everyone interested can find it also on the internet and your website. Thank you very much, Martin. Again, back to Brussels, and have a good day.
Many thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
So we are now going to our next keynote. A speaker from the European Parliament, Andrei. I hope that we can connect to him, and then we hopefully see the vision that the European Parliament, or our representatives in Brussels, can drive forward. And I see, Andrei, you are online. I can see you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. Very good. Thank you for having us here in your home country. I think you probably heard what Martin said earlier, and I'm sure you have your own views, but you also in the Parliament have, of course, your own political vision and your own direction. You have 45 minutes. If you want, we can have a few questions afterwards. We leave it up to you, and then let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Well, on a sort of a light note at the beginning, it's I think quite symptomatic paradox of this period, a very difficult one, that two Czechs are talking to you from Brussels when you are sitting in Prague. So I hope the next time we'll meet, it will be possible actually to see and meet each other in person.
And Andrei, we're drinking your beer, and Americans drinking your beer in Prague. So
yes,
we welcome you home soon.
Good, and you have my full support. I think it's a very good thing to do when you're in Prague. I assure you. No, I was listening very carefully to Martin's presentation, and obviously, I mean, he's a very good expert in these issues, and I think it was a very good presentation of the current landscape where we are when it comes to the EU public policies regarding the sustainable finance sector and the sustainable finance file. And I think, to be honest, the EU is in the forefront, and It's not only the ambition of the current European Commission, as it was mentioned, but I think to a very large extent, this ambition is also shared by European Parliament, and I think also the result of the European elections held last year was quite clear in this regard. Maybe I would start first with more finance part. It is more, let's say, my expertise as I'm sitting in the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee in the European Parliament, and I'm also chairing a working group that is focusing its work on the issue of access to finance for small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think these are the issues that, if they were critical before the crisis, I think now the urgency even is even more important, and it's even higher. So maybe let me start with the general framework. Let's say the ambition of the Capital Markets Union, and maybe to situate it a little bit in the general framework and the policies of the European Union. We are currently at this stage. We've seen the vast majority of 13 Capital Markets Union proposals adopted by the European Parliament and the Member States and the Council, and as well as 3 sustainable finance proposals, as Martin mentioned earlier in his presentation. We will actually be voting on the final agreement on the sustainable finance taxonomy next week in the plenary in the European Parliament. Which should pave the way for its entry into force and the development of secondary legislation by the Commission, as again mentioned by Martin, by the end of this year. Then the crowdfunding framework is similarly almost ready to put into action. We have the trialogue agreement, so the interinstitutional agreement between the co-legislators. It was voted in the Econ Committee at the beginning of last month. The first CMU action plan, when it was published, was sort of criticized by a number of people for addressing only low-hanging fruits, if you want. And I believe that we really need to focus more and concentrate, and maybe even enhance and speed up our work in order to develop the Capital Markets Union, to increase cross-border market integration. As it is necessary in the next stage to target the measures that may be politically difficult, but which will lead to tangible results. And I think it's also very appropriate to speak about this issue today, because it was earlier today that when the European Commission published a report from the high-level expert panel on the Capital Markets Union, formulating 15 recommendations on what should we do in the future. And I think this is a very timely moment, and we should really put our effort into this ambition. And to be honest, I think some of the critics on, let's say, the first stage of CMU were relevant, and I think now we should sort of learn our lesson and go ahead. So we'll be entering a secondary phase of a CMU-related legislation, which I hope will be largely based also on the recommendation of this high-level expert group. And I think the first phase was more focused on stimulate jobs and growth in the European Union, and obviously this was also, I think, largely the ambition of the Juncker Commission, which was basically dealing with the aftermath of economic and financial crisis. I believe that now we should recalibrate our focus to improve, as I said, the cross-border financing possibilities, so the cross-border market integration, through capital markets across the all European Union, so meaning 27 markets and 27 member states. And just let me add one thing, which I think is quite important. It's also mentioned by the high-level expert group. It's Brexit. It used to be a buzzword in the European Union for quite a while, but it didn't disappear. I mean, Formally, the United Kingdom is not a member of the European Union anymore, but we are still under the transitional period. But we have to organize ourselves together with our UK counterparts, especially in the area of financial services, in order to not undermine what we are actually trying to do here in the European Union. And I think this is quite an important task. So for me, it is very important, and maybe we can address that also in the discussion after how exactly we should sort of deal and articulate our efforts when the no deal or deal Brexit. I think that is something to be seen only, but how we actually should address this challenge in the future. And of course, the current global environment, which I think leads to a shift in priorities as the economy is relaunched following the lockdown and the economic damage largely caused by the pandemic of the last months. I think there are some successful experience that we already have from the Capital Markets Union. We can build on them, but we need to tackle mainly the cross-borders and domestic barriers, other obstacles that would lead to capital markets fragmentation as we currently experience it and know it, and also sort of an inadequate access of businesses to market-based financing. A lack of long-term investment by citizens and institutional investors, and I think this was also mentioned by Martin in his presentation. I think that this is real key. This should be a key ambition of the CMU effort. Increase critically, massively, the capacity for companies to search for market-based financing, on one hand. And on the other hand, actually enhance the participation of retail investors in it. The European businesses, in particular the SMEs, lack access to capital to fund innovation and growth. And in some regions, more than others. We come from Central Europe. We have some good practices over there already. But I mean, when talking to business community, you can really see how deep and traditional is actually for example the link to bank lending and bank sector in general. So I think there is actually a lot we can do here, and in the search of risk capital. Some of and that's the problem we face, I think, for quite a while. Some of the most promising startups and scale-ups basically decide to relocate outside Europe, or they have to scale down their ambition, which has a negative impact on Europe's growth potential and productivity. Just don't get me wrong, I still believe that banks are and will remain an essential element of European financial system. But I think we should be able to promote and provide alternatives. The over-reliance by European businesses on traditional bank lending carries risks. And again, I mean, I think we saw it also 10 years ago when the bank's lending dries up during periods of financial distress or crisis. Then businesses, and again in particular the SMEs, are not able to rely on alternative funding because either it's very limited or it's just not existing. And with this little funding diversity, economies have little capacity to withstand shocks in times of crisis. And I think, again, Martin spoke about resilience. This is an important term, which I think we should sort of include in our vocabulary when we discuss those issues and when we discuss the recovery as well. Because I believe that that the speed of the recovery also depend on our ability to basically propose and promote alternatives. And maybe because we were not able to do this properly in the last decade, this is also why the recovery from the previous financial crisis was considerably slower in Europe than in economies which much better diversified financial structures, such as US or Japan. I think without access to capital markets and the suitable financial operators, especially small businesses end up being affected disproportionately during those types of crises, and it has damage on the overall resilience of the European economy, as it was mentioned. And I think we can again see it during this crisis. Well, it's a different type of crisis, I agree, but we can still see some similar symptoms to what we saw 10 years ago. The SMEs struggling to stay afloat, range of different measures which are taken by different member states to remove burdens on SMEs, provide direct public funding in some cases for SMEs, and I think this is something that we obviously, it's a logical reaction. But we should not, stay sort of satisfied saying, okay, I mean, we have enough in our toolbox actually to face it. I think we can do and offer better and more. And also, when speaking about market-based finance, I think it's much better suited for innovative businesses with limited collateral and with irregular cash flows, as we see it. And for example, this would also include, for example, some of the companies currently impacted, let's say, in very traditional touristic sector. But I think it's also valid for technological startups or scale-ups. And we speak about crowdfunding, which I think is a very important element or a pillar of our efforts, because it can fulfill a crucial role here to help finance the scaling up of businesses at the stage when they actually start and begin to tap for markets funding. I think the European businesses also need access to financing at all their stages of development. Traditionally, I think we are currently drafting a paper in our group on SMEs where we have one of the statements that no company was born big, and I think this is something that sort of is valid also in this regard. I think it during the life cycle of the company, starting with bank lending and then smoothly transitioning, let's say, towards venture capital, business angel, private equity, or public markets. This is something where I think in the area, let's say, of the market financing, the landscape in Europe can offer much more. Because all of those instruments or all of those sources, if you wish, are of market capitalization in Europe are still too low. I think the Capital Markets Union achieves this by deepening and better integrating EU capital markets. By supporting developing capital markets, by making them more accessible as sources of financing for small, innovative, and high-tech businesses. And I also believe that in supporting investment in fast-growing and technologically advanced companies, the Capital Markets Union will contribute by attracting, training, and also retaining the best talent from Europe and abroad. And Martin mentioned the international dimension. I think this is also something I will address a bit later, but it's an important part of it. In the first keynote, we were discussing quite a lot the issue of sustainability and sustainable finance. Obviously, addressing the climate issue is one of the defining tasks of this generation. And as Martin mentioned and enumerated and calculated, it will require an unprecedented level of investment. He mentioned the $500 billion investment need. And I think, again, just to fit it into the discussions that we're currently having, also in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. On one hand, we have an unprecedented level of public investment, be it the national budgets investing in economies in Europe, be it the next multi-year financial framework, together with the recovery fund or the next generation EU fund, which altogether combined for again unprecedented level of investment from the public side. We have other incentives, you know, through other stakeholders such as EIB, etc., etc. But as it was mentioned a couple of times already, the public side is just not enough. I mean, it will when we calculate the needs, it will just not be sufficient. So I think we also need to mobilize properly the private pillar and give enough incentives also from the private side, actually, you know, in order to combine for these efforts. And to me, it seems that the private capital will be critical. When we are discussing and you know how to achieve the goals that are set, and in my view, well-functioning capital markets will be essential, in particular for attracting those private investments and channeling them to sustainable activities. And for that, better transparency of sustainable features of financial products will allow investors also to identify viable sustainable investments. And I think this is what we are discussing when we were dealing with the proposals from the Commission on Sustainable Finance, the Taxonomy, etc. But also better integrated capital markets with interconnected infrastructures are more efficient distribution channels. So that's again, you know, the point in favor of working and developing the CMU. And I also believe they will facilitate access to those products across Europe and enhance their liquidity in the end. I think we should be able to deliver on those promises, on those commitments, with strong and immediate political support at the highest level. We heard from the Commission, and I think there the ambition is clear. I think the coordination between European institutions will be crucial. The European Parliament, I think, is on the same page, and when also reading, for example, the upcoming program of the next 3 presidencies, which will start by German presidency in July, I think the ambition is shared there as well. So I think we should sort of coordinate and cooperate together in order to deliver, and to be honest, when we look on a global scale, I think the window of opportunities for us is slowly closing, because the other global players are gradually assuming a much bigger role in global markets, and this is especially, I think, true when we look east in Asia. I mean, you are sitting in Prague. We are 2 Czechs for the keynote. I think it's more than valid for the region of Central and Eastern Europe. For example, in Czech Republic, I think we have a lot of potential for capital market growth. The Czech market is one of the deepest capital markets in our region. But having said that, there is still a very strong and high reliance by both businesses and citizens on bank lending and bank savings, and I think and this leads me to one important point that was mentioned as well, and that's financial literacy, or let's say awareness and literacy, because I believe we sort of need to work more on those issues, and I'm glad to see one of the recommendations of the high-level expert group on CMU is also dedicated to those issues. I think they will be critical, not only when we talk about let's say the citizens' involvement and as a retail investors, etc., but I think it's also valid from the side of the entrepreneurs, the business owners. I think they should be also able and aware of possibilities that they have when they're running their businesses, that they have on financial markets actually, and what are the options when they look for additional funding. Let me give you a short overview of the European Parliament priorities as we currently discuss, and then I will sum up with some recommendations or takeaways, I would say, from the discussion, and we'll be happy actually to start a discussion with you and the audience. So as I said, the crowdfunding and the sustainable finance were basically discussed in the Parliament. And I think these are very important contributions, because when we look what is the situation now, what was it before, we saw a disparate national approaches, which sort of put obstacles or hampered potential for large-scale investments in European member states. And with these two regulations, which the Parliament was very much supportive of, we now have a solid basis to both, crowdfunding and sustainable finance to grow across the single market, which I think is a very important step forward. And furthermore, we can implement sustainable finance right. We will have a model of the world to follow, and I think this was something that Martin also mentioned, that we are sort of a trendsetter, if you wish, in this area, and I think this should be some sort of our ambition actually to keep this. We also discussed the Eurobonds. We had an exchange with the ECB President Christine Lagarde on Monday, and she mentioned the surge that Martin was actually alluding to of green bonds on the markets. I think she said that now almost half of green bonds actually in 2019 were issued in euros, which show the importance of the European economies actually that are playing in this area. And again, it is also something that should help to propel euro as a currency towards the global standards and sort of home of sustainable finance, I believe. I think it is important that we continue to foster the environment where such issuances continue to grow, and it was mentioned also by the Commission earlier, but not only through bonds, but also through equity, which European Union is currently lacking. And this is particularly important again as we emerge from the current pandemic situation. And particularly SMEs will need a broad range of funding opportunities. And I think, as we're realizing the real impact of the pandemic, this is something that we see more and in very clear terms now. And it is therefore welcome that we can see also increases in crowdfunding equity for SMEs in Europe in recent years, and I believe this is something that we should also encourage in the post-COVID period. And you were discussing this in your introductory session, and I have to say I fully agree. I believe that this crisis will actually help and sort of speed up some of the changes and some of the let's say some of the trends or tendencies that we were already witnessing. But I truly believe that the crisis will sort of work as a catalyst and will help actually to maybe move forward with faster with some of those initiatives. we were discussing how, actually to improve, and this was also part of the Capital Markets Union Action Plan, the access to finance for innovative companies and startups and other companies that are unlisted. However, investment finance still remains very difficult in Europe, particularly when they move from startup into expansion phase. And I think this is the critical part that we should try to address as well. And I see actually a merit here in alternative sources of finance, such as crowd or peer-to-peer financing. Which can be actually a very important source of non-bank financing in support of those innovative companies. But as I said, in the post-COVID period, I can imagine that this would also broaden sort of its scope, not only to, let's say, technology companies, but also to, let's say, more traditional sectors. As I said, the Parliament has consistently supported those measures. I think also in 2016, when the first CMU initiative was adopted, the prospectus regulation that was discussed in its framework, we in the Parliament have been keen to ensure that the crowdfunding platforms are able to benefit from favorable environments, and in light of Dutch regulation, which would allow them to grow, which I think is one of the parts. But obviously, we are a little bit further right now. As well, similar with sustainable finance, the Parliament supported the option of smaller non-financial companies being able to make use of the taxonomy labels on an optional basis, and we fought to ensure a level playing field across the EU, and we hope to see this become reality at some point. I mean, it would mention that the Commission will still have to present the delegated act on the taxonomy, and then by the end of this year, the second batch next year, and I think. But already with the framework legislation, we have a good idea of where we should going, and then I think with the secondary legislation we will have a much better and precise idea as well. Let me just shortly give you an overview. We are also currently discussing the digital finance issue, and Martin mentioned the digital sustainable finance. I think it's sort of it is part of it. I myself author of a own initiative legislative report in Econ Committee, which deals with fintechs and digital finance, and we are working on our views on how to actually address this sector before the European Commission publishes its proposal later this year, which is part of the Commission work program. In this area, we sort of address some of the let's say the critical points of the digital finance, with also proposing some legislative action actually to take on the European level in this area. One regards designing the crypto asset framework, including the EU definition, and also sort of an open taxonomy of the crypto asset concept, which we currently face. Also, the cyber resilience framework, which would be, or which should be also targeted on financial services, and I think this is one of the aspects where we also, as the European Union, need to be very well aware of potential impacts of, let's say, the cyber breaches or cyber incidents when it comes to improving financial services. And one last point, I think very important also in the area that we are discussing, and one of the priorities also for this Commission and the Parliament, that's the area of data. How to enhance and also sort of protect the data, including big data, we're proposing issues such as digital onboarding, EIDs on the EU level, harmonized frameworks in order to promote cross-border recognition. So it is my conviction that going forward, we really need a modern legislative framework which would facilitate the growth of, as I said, not only the digital finance, but also other innovative forms of finance, such as crowdfunding, and renewed focus on encouraging sustainable investments through pragmatic policies. And for the upcoming years, I expect to see a shift in both how businesses are financed, and also what investments are made by larger institutional investors, but also the retail investors. And I'll be really happy to see a growing ecosystem of let's say new alternative sources. And I truly believe that we can together with the industry. As Oliver mentioned it at the beginning, we can sort of join forces and help this to put in practice, because I think this will be critical. And together with the sustainable finance ambition, I think this should be another continuous and complementary ambition that we should all share. I will end here just to allow for some. Maybe a discussion, and we'll be happy to now listen to questions or comments, or maybe also inputs from your side.
Yes. Thank you very much, Andrei. Thank you very much. It was very insightful. It was good to also have the view of the Parliament, which in many cases is similar to the Commission, but you also have your different views and you drive your aspects. We have a few questions that come from the audience. I just wanted to build on this, because that goes also to the first question. You fully rightly mentioned the prospectus directive, where the Parliament indeed was driving, and I remember this very keenly, that we got really involved and could support with evidence the discussion to move the threshold to 1 million euros for equity issues without prospectus in Europe, which is still the case, and even now improving with the new regulation. But so the first question we have is, now we have this prospectus directive. Now we have the European crowdfunding service provider rules that will hopefully come effect next year and should push the market to new levels and create competition. And we have the Sustainable Development Framework and the European Green Deal. So how do you see this work together? How do you see crowdfunding actually link into this? And how do we manage to make this a success? So that actually crowdfunding can help reach the Sustainable Development Goals or the Green Deal. Do you have any ideas? Do you have any plans of maybe some cooperation between industry and the public sector that you can share with us?
Well, I think, and thank you for the question. I think those let's say work strands are complementary, and I think it was also mentioned by the Commission. I really think, as we see the sustainability issue, it's one of the main concerns of the European citizens. And if we look at the crowdfunding as a sort of a let's say instrument for citizen participation, then I believe that it's really now up to us, to create a framework and the landscape which will be able to introduce reliable and clear financial products, which actually then the retail investors, the citizens, can sort of opt for and choose in order to sort of materialize their ambition and also the sort of the participation in our climate efforts. So I believe philosophically, I don't see any controversies or any contradictory movements when we discuss those issues. Obviously, and I think this is the critical part, and this is where the industry and the public sector should sit down and really try to develop new ideas. It's really about proposing those products and make them attractive enough, make them reliable, and also make, and we discussed that, make sure that the retail investors are aware and know about them, and not only that they exist, but also how they function, and what actually what kind of ambition or goals they are also sort of designed to. And I think these are the critical, and obviously I think in both industries and the public sector has its role to play when we discuss, for example, the financial literacy or the financial awareness. Let's say the industry for its commercial interests, that's clear, and from public sector also for sort of a guiding trends or guiding principles, you know, to give to investors, actually to help them specify what kind of goals they would like to support and what kind of goals they want to achieve. So I believe we can do much, but again, the cooperation would be crucial here.
Now, you answered correctly, of course. I mean, it has to be a cooperation between the sector, the industry, and crowdfunding platforms. We will have a panel later on. They're already looking at this and thinking at this, and the policy framework as well, and the politician. We know that the European Parliament has kick-started a discussion that has now reached the level where we think about match funding opportunities through structural funds with crowdfunding in order to reach some development. So this is, I think, promising on both sides, and it will need to develop. What about and you mentioned them earlier, the SMEs, or in case of, let's say, energy development, project developers that want to produce or put up, you know, PV installations that have a sustainable business that they want to launch, or a product that they want to develop. Do we have specific ideas how we can onboard them as well, so that there's actually also the demand for the finance that we are creating?
I think actually we can. Obviously, right now we are in, let's say, in many member states in a difficult times in the crisis. So many companies and many stakeholders are sort of, you know, fighting for basically their survival. But I truly believe that when we enter the recovery phase, and with such large also incentives coming from public sector, I think exactly then it will be the SMEs, you know, which will be in the center or in the heart of let's say the greening or the more sustainable activities. But also, and I think this is another part of this fast recovery. It will be about digitalization, you know, and I think this is sort of two trends where I see a lot of interest from the industry, from SMEs, actually, you know, how they can sort of work more efficient when it comes to their relation, for example, to the climate issue, but also more efficient when it comes to the online environment. But I think, yeah, I mean, if we want to revive sort of the European economic environment, and I think that this would be one of the crucial ambition in the next couple of years, I think there will also be a sort of a, you know, demand from the SMEs for actually helping them to move forward with let's say the green and digital revolution, if you allow the term.
Yes. Just maybe one last question before we come to the end of our time. I know it's a difficult topic for the European Parliament or European Commission, because it's on a discussion on national level. But when we think about incentives to create, you know, a boom in, let's say, sustainable development, in productivity or in SMEs to create these things, taxation often is it's a good incentive to drive these things onto the market. Do you have any insight if the member states today, if there's a discussion to have a harmonized approach to it, that all or some member states will agree on the incentives they might take on this?
I think, to be honest and realistic, some of the member states, I think they already did it in the first and urgent response to the crisis. On the EU level, it's always, I think, very delicate and very difficult to actually to discuss it, as this is very much linked to the competencies of the member states. But I think we will have the discussion around the new budget and the recovery fund, and there will be one discussion which is very much linked to it. It's about own resources of the EU budget, and there we can see that maybe we can have some additional incentives there. But when it comes to national measures, I think it would be actually what would be first step that I would definitely welcome, and I would sort of encourage everybody to discuss more. It's really about the cross-border activities, because and it doesn't really have to be about the taxation as we know it, so tax rates and tax base, etc., etc. But I mean, we can always start with steps like less administrative burden on for companies when it comes to taxation requirements, etc., etc. And I think those issues, when we discuss the proper functioning of the single market, those issues cannot be avoided. I think they especially for companies, they are very important. And obviously, without really. Because I don't have a crystal ball, I can't really forecast about where the discussion about taxation will go in the European Union. I mean, the proper, let's say, corporate taxation, for example. I think we can do some steps already within the current framework, just to facilitate actually the cross-border operation, and really to enhance and deepen the single market also for companies, but also when it comes to let's say access to finances, as I was saying in my intervention, access to finance sources, etc., etc. So I think maybe we don't have to go through this difficult debate right now, but maybe we can first start with those issues that are complicating lives of companies, but maybe are not that difficult actually to tackle. And it's really about sitting down and discuss decisions and options and ways out.
Thank you very much, Andre. That's a good ending, positive and very focused. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you for the invitation, and I wish you a successful continuation of the event.
Thank you very much. We will now turn to a panel which will be directed and managed by Ron, and this is where the crowdfunding platforms and other stakeholders have, of course, the chance to respond to this and start building the new kind of way crowdfunding wants to address sustainable finance. So with this, we should go to our panel discussion.
Oliver, we've got a great group to be our first panel of this conference. Kristen, Nuno, and Philippe, we can all see you. And I'm wondering if, to start us off here a bit, if you could tell us a little bit about your organizations and, more importantly, about yourselves. And Kristen, could we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Ron, for the invitation. And yeah, hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be part of the 5th ECN CrowdCamp. And I would have loved to join you in Prague and have some beers last night, but I'll do this next time. Happy that you had some time to catch up. Yeah, my name is Christine Friedrich. I'm the CEO of Investment. We're originally equity-based crowdfunding platform, and you I have to rearrange my look here a bit so I can look into myself. Okay, that's better. So yeah, I'm the CEO of Investment, and we have been around since 2011. We originally came out of a university, a technical university. Therefore, we are focusing on tech early stage startups for quite some while, and we're experiencing all the ups and downs of the industries. And from an early stage on, we were also engaged in ECN and really enjoyed the pan-European conversation, because not so many stakeholders experience similar things about what it actually means to build a platform and to balance out the different interests of investors on the one side and projects on the other side. And we recently adjusted our business model and went now more into SMEs, growth startups, and also sustainability. So we had the opportunity also in the past, because we always were focusing on innovation and tech, to have also green projects. But the term sustainability as a field wasn't so visible, and just the last years become such a trend. So that's actually even a framework now we operate with, and I really enjoy the sustainability community because there's a lot of alignment with what we as a crowdfunding industry are trying to achieve. And I'm, by the way, also the chair of the board of the ECN, so I'm happy also to present some reflections of the platform providers here in this panel today.
Thank you, Kristen. I can assure you that Oliver is working very hard on all of your behalf here in Prague, in addition to drinking beer, I might say. Philippe, can we hear from you? Philippe?
Yes. Hi, Ron, and everyone else. Happy to be here, sharing my insights. So Philippe Portel, I'm actually an physiotherapist, made entrepreneur, and now made investor. I'm a strong defensor of the crowdfunding model, as personally as through Core Angels Impact, where we invest. And the Core Angels Impact, in short, is a pre-seed impact investment fund. We are based in Portugal, but we invest across Europe. We are fairly new, which is good in this time because we still have funds to deploy. And we have 5 investments at the moment running. And one of them is actually in a crowdfunding platform, which we have a lot of hope in them. And they actually work with energy and sustainable projects. So this is a very dear topic to me.
Super.
Looking forward for the discussion.
Super, as are we. Nuno.
Hi, everyone. I am Nuno. I hope you can hear me well. I had a bit of a sound issue in the preparation for the meeting, but it should be working fine. I'm also very happy that I was invited to be here to share what GoParity is and what we're doing. GoParity, we describe ourselves as an impact finance platform, which is basically a platform where both people and companies can invest in sustainability projects. This meaning projects that are in line with at least one of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've heard about the taxonomy earlier on the conference, so we all know how important it is to have proper frameworks that define what sustainability is. We have been operational for 3 years now. We have invested more than 2 million euros in sustainable projects. We have a community of more than 6,000 users, and we avoid annual emissions of 8,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. We have funded 40 projects so far, and we have just launched our first project outside of Europe, which is a project in Brazil. So even though most of our projects are based in Portugal, we are currently starting the internationalization route.
Super. Well, let's start with the questions, and to get us going here, Philip, if I could start with you. From your investor perspective, is there a connection between sustainability and crowdfunding? And what is it exactly? If there is a connection, is it growing? Is it a fad or a trend? In other words, is the relationship between sustainability and crowdfunding itself sustainable? And forgive me if that sounds like a question written by a lawyer, but it was.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to take it. So crowdfunding for me, like I said, is something very close to the heart, not only because of that, but also because I do believe in the model of crowdfunding. And crowdfunding for me, or one of the biggest advantages of crowdfunding, besides communication, besides marketing, besides all of that, is that crowdfunding, it's a way of actually democratizing the access of investment. And what I'm seeing, either personally and as an investor, is that this movement, this impact investment movement, is being driven by two big forces. You can call it down and bottom up in a sense. And the bottom up is taken by, it's led by the people. So for me, crowdfunding is a great way of giving voice and giving power to the people in a sense, because it allows them to invest from 10 euros, from 20 euros, and to actually let them choose the investments and the projects they want to see in the market. So for me, yes, there is a strong correlation between sustainability and crowdfunding, mainly as crowdfunding is a way of letting the people choose which kind of projects they want to see. And what we are seeing is that actually a lot of sustainable projects, a lot of impact projects are being funded by the crowd, by the people with 10, 20, with small investments. I see this as a trend that is actually growing. So I don't believe it will be, or it is a fad or something that will end in the short term. Because in the end, when we talk about sustainability, we are talking about the future. So this is not something just for now. This is not something for short term. What I strongly believe is that in the future, we won't talk more about sustainability investment. We won't talk more about impact investment. We will just talk about investment. And within that, sustainability and impact will come and will be inside already that word. Because that's something we have to do, something we have to think in terms of long-term, just managing better our resources. And that's how we work as investors, and that's how I work also personally.
So sustainability becoming the status quo, actually, in the longer term. Yes, Kristen and Nuno, anything to add to that?
I think Philip made it really clear. I think I love it how you see that everything's going the direction that in a couple of years we maybe don't even talk about the differentiation anymore, because everything we do has to be in some way sustainable. So I like to point that out and for us to have in mind.
Super. Well, let me then direct a couple of questions, Kristen, to you and Nuno to begin with. And let me ask these two things together, and you can take them any way you want to take them, approach them any way you want to approach them. But first, from the crowdfunding platform perspective, is sustainability a push or a pull phenomenon at the moment? Are you simply reacting to market demand or making a market? And then secondly, are there any different challenges that go hand in hand with a sustainable investment agenda than with other alternative investment agendas that are open to you? Please.
Should I start?
Yeah, you can start, sure.
Okay. So the first question about being, are we creating a market or are we addressing a market? I think, looking at our own experience, it feels like we started by creating a market, and then that market has been growing quite fast. And so I think we are now actually addressing a market, but you can also see it from two different perspectives. So because in a crowdfunding platform, the challenge is always about the balance between projects that need funding and people to invest in those projects. And if we think about the market, of course, it's still not a mainstream thing for people to think of crowdfunding as their preferential means of investment, let alone thinking of sustainable crowdfunding as their main mean of investment. So from that perspective, I would say we're still creating markets on the investor side, whereas on the promoter side and on the project owner side, there is a lot of demand for funding, and it comes from many different sectors and many different stages of development. And thinking about the challenges, I will just highlight two, then we can discuss them more if you want. But I think the main one challenge is thinking long term. So both from the private individual investor, as well as for the green investors and the impact in investment funds, etc. It's very easy for people to think and to mention and to advertise that they are impact investors and that they are sustainable investors. But we all need to realize that sustainability means long term. Otherwise, we're just we take the risk of always being cutting corners and not being really doing anything that is actually really sustainable on the long term. And the second challenge, I would say, with all this sustainability reporting and marketing, etc., that's been growing and going on, I think the second challenge is definitely to be very aware or coherent and not let any sort of greenwashing or impact washing damage the sector's reputation, because there's also a lot of people that are willing to find an opportunity to throw it back at us.
Meaning making up a characterization of sustainability that's not there? When you say greenwashing?
I mean, advertising, communicating sustainable projects or green projects that are actually not that green in the end.
Yeah. Kristen, you wanted to add?
It's very easy if you want to take sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
I was just going to say, it's very easy to pick up any given project and give it an impact tweak. But then you're actually not making something new. You're just highlighting or retelling the same story in a way that it seems an impactful project. And that's one of the challenges that I think we have as a sector.
Great. Should I add some points regarding the push and pull question? From my point of view, both go parallel and are catalysator each other. And when we look at the last 10 years of crowdfunding, there were always, from the beginning, some sustainability-focused platforms. So crowdfunding was already also driven by people who were on a mission for a certain cause. So sustainability was always one of the core niches, I would say. And in the last years, the platform became bigger, more mature, and also learned a lot and had the opportunity now to leverage this interest by giving projects opportunity to actually showcase the big impact they can have. And it's great how players like you and GoParity are doing it, that you also show how much emissions, for example, were reduced or saved. And all these different mechanisms and parameters for sure will help to make it also more visible. And I think that's what actually also crowdfunding can do, is just to create excitement and access and inclusion for more private people to be interested in making an impact by putting their money into projects they believe in. And when you see, for example, countries like Netherlands or UK, who have already since longer a tradition and active participation of private investors, we in Germany, for example, we have maybe on the one other hand a different mindset, and we also see how important it is to make economy and investing visible to a bigger audience of people who actually realize, hey, you really can have an impact and make it for them as simple as possible. I think that's one of the goals we as a platform need to have, is to making investing more transparent and easy to understand. And this is in the financial market not always so easy, because we have a lot of compliance, we have a lot of technical words to use. But there's the beauty of variety in crowdfunding, and I just want to mention reward-based here. We are a lending platform, but reward-based has also a huge impact. It's because it's an easier barrier for people to go into going into a project by getting a perk, supporting something, getting a nice note, than to go straight to investing. I think that's why reward-based crowdfunding is also always so important. And Oliver already knows I always love to mention it so we don't leave it out, that this is a very important part of our mission in the industry to get a bigger reach and to support more projects. And the challenges, I already mentioned mindset, financial education, reducing complexity, finding new ways of increasing the customer protection, and don't only use warning signals as a mechanism. For example, we have a project at the moment, they have a very good equity, they have a very good credit rating, they have 0.2 default rate potential by their numbers, and we still have to write very big below warning, you can lose all your money. Of course, it's true. But for people who maybe are not so sophisticated and just see it, they are maybe already pushed out. And that's why reward base is a bit lighter. And I would hope that in the further discussions also we ask ourselves how we can rather increase the education and reduce maybe the barriers in the process and make it more smooth and more accessible for more people.
Interesting. Oliver, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Ron. Just when Nuno, you mentioned greenwashing and we talked about the impact and how you think, Felipe, that sustainability will be left out, it's just investment. Kind of brings back the memories from when we talked about impact investing. Of course, every investment has an impact. But if you say I'm doing impact investing, then it's for something good. And you have a defined goal other than financial results that you want to achieve with it. And then the question that always has to come afterwards is, how do you measure the impact? And so most people couldn't and still cannot measure the impact, which brings us back to, where's impact ending and where's greenwashing starting? So how does the crowd can help you to monitor this or to ensure that the projects that you finance are actually developing impact and actually working towards sustainability? I mean, can you use them and do they have the skills to also understand the project complexity in order to make these decisions? Was a question, is that clear? No?
Yeah, no, for me, the question is clear. Was it for me, Oliver?
For all of you, any of you.
Okay. I can kickstart. We've been doing a lot of work and a lot of research, and the truth is there is a lot of frameworks that support impact metrics and impact measuring, and we've been working on trying to find the best set of KPIs possible. Because we all, if it's a solar power project, then the impact is pretty obvious. You're generating electricity from a renewable source. You're avoiding CO2 emissions. You're not using any fossil fuels, so you're also not dependent, and so there's clear benefits to it. But then other projects are much harder to measure. But there has been a lot of work done in the past few years to be able to create the best metrics and performance measures to be used. And there's also a lot of, there's one thing that is really also interesting, is the unintended consequences or the indirect impacts of projects that can also be measured and tracked. And sometimes you're not even considering them. But I'll give you a short example. One day we invited over the president of an old music school in Lisbon that financed their renewal, their solar panels and switching to LED lighting in GoParity. And when he came to a small conference that we organized, and he was telling about the project and the benefits and how much they saved, and they were more environmentally friendly. And that's what we were expecting to listen. But then he said, but I think the major biggest impact was actually on improving people's morale and people's conditions of work, because they were going to a music school that is more than 100 years old, where they had old lighting and lighting blinking, and they were going through financial trouble. And then suddenly, so the mood was like very, very, very low, and there was no investment in the school for a very long time. And then suddenly people get to work and students get to their music school and they see this new, steady, quality kind of light in their music school. They were not used, and then suddenly they feel like, wow, someone is investing. We're getting back on track. It feels like they're getting so yeah, to answer your question, I think that there's a lot of metrics, and one of the challenges there is also to be able to properly communicate them. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of talking like if we were talking to 7-year-olds to be able to do that, because no one is obliged to be a technician. No one has to be an expert, and no one has even to know how the electricity sector works or what a ton of CO2 actually means.
Kristen or Philippe?
Just to reinforce what Nuno was saying, and thank you for the question, Oliver. I do believe there are a couple of layers in that question. So I don't think so. Again, I'm a strong believer of crowdfunding, and I do like, for instance, that when you do a crowdfunding campaign, then the project or the business suddenly has 200 or 300 more people, ambassadors. Well, how you want to call it, but it's not up to them, or it's not their responsibility to actually track or measure the impact of the project or the company. So that responsibility has to be from the project itself, from the company itself, and then the crowdfunding platform, it's the intermediary. So they should audit that measure and see if it's okay, if it makes sense, and then transfer it and transfer that knowledge and transfer that information to the investors. In terms of actually frameworks for that, I am a strong defensor. So I don't believe there is one measure fits all in a sense. So I am a strong believer and defensor of the theory of change and the logic model, where basically measures inputs and then outputs, outcomes, and impact. And this is fairly flexible for all projects and for all companies. They then just have to adapt it to their own reality. And with this, so measuring again inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact, we can have an idea of the impact the project is having and comparing it with the inputs. So just to summarize, yes, I think the investors, they can be a force to help, but it's not their responsibility to measure or to track that impact. That responsibility should be from the project, and in this case from the crowdfunding platforms, to help and to communicate this with investors, and also to the crowd itself, to the public itself, because we are still in the moment that we need these type of communications to be more broad and to be more known, basically.
Thank you, Philippe. Kristen, anything?
Yeah, just to add from the framework, so there are different impact frameworks which are widely discussed, and we, for us at the moment, are mainly using the SDGs as a guiding factor, because they're also very nice to illustrate and to explain to the investors. So, for example, at the offer profile, all projects, it doesn't matter if SME or an energy project, they have the SDGs, which this project is counting into. But besides, we're looking into different frameworks, and that's actually also the reason why I'm part of this investment of the Sustainability Working Group of ECN, to dive deeper in how we as an industry, for example, can find mutual frameworks we are using, which we are analyzing and develop further, and joining there as a discussion. So I think it's very important, as already said, that we make it transparent, that we monitor it, and this will be a journey, I guess, and it's very exciting what's already on the table, but it has to be also simple to understand.
Super.
As well.
Clearly some work to do. Let me, I think we're ready to go on now. Maybe, Nuno, I can come back to you with this question. Although our assignment was to ask ourselves why sustainability is important to crowdfunding, what are your thoughts about a flipped version of that question? That is, why is crowdfunding important to sustainability? Any thoughts on that?
I like that. Yeah, I think that I even like the flipped version more, maybe, because if you think about it, the transition and the sustainable world that we want to create, it will not happen without everyone's engagement. And if we use crowdfunding as a measure to engage the people, then we can be talking about a much faster transition, of course. And also the opposite is also obviously still applicable. But I would go back to the point that we need to be able to think long term if we want to address sustainability, and we need to be flexible. And crowdfunding clearly provides you with that opportunity and with that kind of approach. Whereas there's a lot of crowdfunding that is, of course, a huge market, but it's not necessarily people that are willing to invest for 4 or 5 or 6% return. They're looking for more, and not for 5 or 6 or 7 year maturities. They'll be looking for much shorter terms. The same happens with institutional investors. So if we can have crowdfunding become that tool that provides access to finance for sustainable development, I think it makes. I think it's sort of a perfect match.
Thank you, Nuno. Christian or Philip, anything on why is crowdfunding important to sustainability?
I can take it. For sure, I also like the flip side, and also very convinced that, especially what was mentioned today already from the keynote speaker, how important it is to acquire or to reactivate the private capital in order to actually be able to facilitate the needs of capital in sustainability projects and to, as a community, push the agenda forward. Platforms are perfect platforms for giving private investors opportunity to find what they're looking for and to make it transparent. And we are also curators, right? So it's also very important. We're in a way an enabler, but also creating trust and visibility for the projects. And when you look at the numbers, alone in Germany, for example, 1,500 billion of private capital are on bank accounts, which is done nothing. And if you just use a part of it, I think there was the number around 319 billion Martin was mentioning before, there would be already alone in Germany a lot of capital to use. And that's why education again is important. Crowdfunding has the opportunity to reach a broader audience, to also build bridges. What we could see in sustainability community in Germany, it already since a few decades, especially financial broker and certain unions are pushing the agenda of placing projects like impact investors and mission houses to private people, usually with a higher ticket entry. And we can see that most of the community is still a bit coming from a different age. In some parts a bit old school, let's say, when it comes, for example, to the way how they do the investments and the way they communicate. As we know, a lot of the private capital is in the boomer generation. They have different needs. They like more to have the conversation directly and so on. But the more the millennials are also coming, and but also the Xers and everybody who's getting more digital, also with Corona now realizing, hey, it's not that bad to make a conference online, which, by the way, I have to congratulate you, is very professionally prepared, and I'm happy that it works out so well. It's very nice. But hopefully we see each other next time. So you can see it is actually working, and it's a transitioning. People's minds are changing, and so there's a great opportunity for crowdfunding. And I really believe that the time for crowdfunding just started. We had the last 10 years a lot to learn and a lot of also compliance stuff to solve, and the regulators to trust and realize we are also having good intentions and trying our best to building bridges and to balance out interests. And therefore, crowdfunding is actually the perfect place for this kind of projects.
Well, Oliver and I would like to take credit for all the technical stuff working right here, but believe me, it's not us, it's a lot of other guys and ladies.
Great. I want to mention it's a very good job on that side also.
But Philip, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I will just like to reinforce just a couple of messages that Christian and Nuno already mentioned, but for me it's important for mainly two reasons. The first one being communication and publicity. So crowdfunding platforms, as being digital as they are, so they reach much more people than traditional communication in a sense. And the other important reason is that this communication, and like Christian was saying, reaches far younger generations. And we are witnessing one of the greatest wealth transfers in history. And so for me, it's really important that these new generations knows more about what is sustainable investment, what is sustainability, what is impact investment, and all of this. And so for me, these crowdfunding platforms are very important to reach these new generations with this new communication and all the possibilities there are out there, and these types of investments that are future investments in a sense.
Yeah.
So I would focus on these two things, communication and communication to the younger generations.
To me, it's interesting that crowdfunding is actually sort of a collaborative tool of governments too, as they push their own agendas. And then on those projects, crowdfunding also supplies participants, maybe some of those young people that you're talking about. So it seemed like there's a very positive relationship there. But if I may go on, I do think that none of us really can hardly ignore the elephant in the room these days, and the reason why we are using this wonderful technology instead of being together and enjoying Prague in person, and that is C19. And what impact do you see C19 having on this relationship between sustainability and crowdfunding that we have been discussing? Some other speakers have kind of addressed that, but I'd be interested in your thoughts as well. Anyone would like to start on that?
Maybe to start, I think we can put it in. Okay.
Christian, please.
We can put it interactive because maybe to start with one point, I guess we will find more in this discussion now, is that it slowed down people a little bit, which is one aspect, that people actually started to think about what are they doing with their life and where's our economy going. The ups and downs on the stock market was also waking the one or the other people up. Even I have to say, when we see what is happening right now, it's quite worrying, the race, and we'll see how it ends. But this is also the interesting opportunity on looking at different other options and to see that maybe real assets investments, long-term investments, could be a big opportunity, and that the world can change overnight. Who knows what is happening tomorrow, and that it's good to rather invest and create and work on the future together with other participants instead of sitting, for example, on your money or to sitting on your great ideas. But we are now in a bridge of where especially the younger generations used to have very rapid and a lot of communication to exchange ideas and to move things forward based on the vision we have. And I'm really happy to see that, especially on the European level, there's a bigger openness to actually interact with all the stakeholders and use the potential which is out there. So we got a bit more digital. This is also an opportunity, and it opened our mind that we have to act and we can act, because if something actually goes as bad, wrong, like C19 consequences are, you can see where a will is also a way. I don't know if you can translate it directly, but everything is also changeable, because every rule we have is actually originally made up for a certain course, and things have changed, and so we have also to change certain regulations, legal frameworks, and so on, to actually support the further growth and survival of our economy.
Yeah, where there's a will, there's a way. That sounds very appropriate. Philippe.
Yeah, so I was going to share my views more on the investor side. We are not a crowdfunding platform, but we are a marketplace in the sense because we are a connection between investors and startups. And what we are feeling with this C19 situation is that we are getting a lot more attention from investors. So we are getting a lot more calls and a lot more requests about investors actually asking how can they have more impact and what is impact investment and how can they shift their investment strategies to actually to be more impactful and to actually to be more sustainable in a sense. And to be honest, that wasn't something I was feeling before the C19 situation. So I'm very helpful and hopeful, for the future with all of these new branch and new investors coming out and actually wanting to transfer their assets to purely financial assets to more impactful assets. So looking forward for the future.
And what if I were such an investor today calling you, Philippe, saying, where should I put my money? What kind of general responses would you be giving me?
Yeah,
no, please no investment advice here, but I mean just sort of in general.
Yeah, exactly. So the general ideas, and this is transversal for everyone. Either you earn 1,000 euros a month or 100,000 euros a month, you should be investing at least 10% of your free capital in a sense. So every month you have your expenses and you have hopefully some leftover that you put for a rainy day, and at least 10% of those leftovers, they should be invested in more risky assets. So you have more traditional and more secure assets, but from your investment portfolio, at least 10% should be in equity or more risky assets. And then, of course, you can have crowdfunding, which is always a good way to start investing with low amounts. You have crowd lending, which is also a good way to put your money to work. And then small funds like us, for instance, or then if you have more capital, bigger funds, or even bonds and all of that. But definitely investing and at least 10% is a good number, should be within everyone's goal, definitely.
Super. Nuno.
Yeah, so going back to your C19 question, it's a very pertinent question, and actually we have a very cool experience with C19. So first of all, when things started to get serious, we were one of the first startups in Portugal to issue mandatory remote work. And we got together with 25 other startups and sent out a press release inviting all the startups and small and medium enterprises to do the same thing that we did. And from that, a movement called Tech for COVID-19 was born, and it grew from the 25 companies to over 600, and it currently has more than 8,000 volunteers working, and we have developed all sorts of projects, from rooms for doctors, computers for students. We have every kind of thing. And we actually, at GoParity, we launched the first COVID-19 fundraiser in Portugal, and in 3 weeks we were able to get 215,000 euros in donations, which was pretty cool because we were the first to act, and then we decided to close the campaign when more like TVs and big foundations started to do their fundraisers. From the investor relations perspective,
Nuno, can I ask you though, what have you done with the proceeds of that fund that you just closed?
We purchased more than 115,000 medical masks. So the whole campaign was designed to purchase individual protection equipment for doctors and nurses working in hospitals. So we bought body covers, masks, and protective glasses.
Super. I interrupted you, but
yeah, I was going to say that from the investor relation perspective. Then, of course, I think this was also sort of a wake-up call, and in a good sense, because it made us feel like we need to be more present, care more, communicate more, inform people more. And of course, it was a big challenge, because in the end, we fund small and medium enterprises, and we have, out of the 38 that were already funded, 9 needed a restructuring of their debt to be able to pay the loans. And it was an incredibly positive experience to go back to people and tell, listen, you have invested in this project. They need a 6-month grace period now. They're asking for also a 6-month extension of the loan. And we got over 95% of acceptance. And we got a lot of messages of encouragement, of people saying, like, of course, and we need to be here for each other, and this is the moment our planet needs more of this kind of project. So it was a really good experience. Of course, we felt a bit of a small slowdown in investments, but from mid-April onwards, investments came back to their usual rate.
Kristen.
Ron, if you allow just one quick example I would like to share with one of our ECN members, which is Start Next, which is the biggest reward-based platform in Germany. So one of the founders, Tino, told me recently, it's really amazing what happened in the last 3 months for them, as all the different restaurants and different, like from cinemas, especially culture creative scene, had issues because of C-19. They actually were doing extra shifts and had so much, also even as a platform, went within and asked themselves, okay, what kind of standards like videos and so on do we reduce in order to make it possible for more projects to go online? And they raised in 3 months 9 million for this project, which actually was 10% of what they made in the last 10 years. So this is very interesting to see how much momentum can also be created when many people are also communicating and showcasing that there is actually an opportunity. Because what the good thing is on that crowdfunding is already more visible is, like you were sharing, that now also are people more willing to participate and to have more confidence in the whole instrument, and also know in case, oh my God, how do I handle now this bill? To know, okay, I have a community, maybe I can use this as an opportunity to sell some cinema tickets in advance. And I found very also great how Start Next, for example, was doing shifts over weekends and evenings in order to actually facilitate all this demand. And this shows also how passionate the people are in this industry to actually make this possible, and how great it is to have also support from other institutions more and more to actually uplift this industry in order to be able to then quickly be there if we are needed there.
That's wonderful. We want to remind our audience that they can send us in questions for this wonderful panel. Oliver, anything on your mind at the moment?
We now talk about COVID-19, so I think we should get back to the main topic a bit now. When we look at I don't know how familiar you are with the policies set out in the Sustainable Finance Framework developed by the Commission over the past years, and this is being used as a tool to deliver some of the, or finance some of the European Green Deal initiatives. And so I think here we could maybe see what is your view on how your platforms in particular, in the current settings that you are, but then also looking at the crowdfunding regulation that hopefully comes next year with ECSP. If you could please kind of elaborate a bit how you see that impacting your future and how you can bring these two things together.
I'm sorry, but I hear Oliver really low. I don't know if you hear me now.
Yeah, They don't hear me, my mic.
Okay, but I just, they're going to give us another mic here.
No,
No?
I don't think so. You can't hear, sorry.
Oliver was asking, maybe I take it then, Oliver, I could understand you well enough. You were asking about how the ESG and other initiatives on European level are enabling us to execute on the mission to bring more or to help sustainability and our platforms both in the same time in a way, and the European harmonization. I would maybe focus on the European harmonization at the moment because for us, I mean, it's something which will come hopefully very soon in January next year. And we are personally very excited, and many other platforms, as we know, are also and are preparing. And it will be just great to have this chance to act more pan-European, and especially to don't worry about how if you're compliant enough, if an investor from outside the nation is investing and so on. So there's just more clarity for everybody, more movement, a great opportunity to, to share investors and projects throughout the pan-European community. We are already, for example, starting to try out pan-European investments as co-investments with other platforms to leverage our reach and to showcase great projects. So I think the European harmonization is especially very important, and therefore crowdfunding can become even more successful, and everybody who's into sustainability then also can create more reach and more visibility and impact. And maybe the other points, Nuno and Fibo want to take over then. So I can talk too loud here.
No, just to reinforce and to answer your question, Oliver, for me, the involvement of the crowdfunding platforms and the private and consequence and the involvement of private investors is fundamental, it's crucial for the success of the Green Deal and for the sustainable development and investment. Because if we compare, if you compare Europe with Asia or China in this case and the US, Europe is far behind in Green Deal, in green investments. So and it's not going to be the European Commission alone that's going to move that needle in favor of Europe. So we need to put here everyone working together. So we need public money together with private money, and again, crowdfunding platforms could be, and they are actually, a great way to attract more private money into this type of deals. So for me, I do have a lot of hope in the European crowdfunding legislation, which is just too late, but at least that something comes out of it finally. So I'm a strong believer on this, and I'm a strong believer on the private investment to support the public investment. Definitely.
Nuno?
Yeah, I would maybe think that, of course, the harmonization is a very big thing, and we are very happy and also looking forward to the opportunities it will bring. But trying to pick up on what I think were other points in your question, and thinking more about financial authorities and regulations and sorry, I believe there's still a lot of work that can be done. Of course, the harmonization is a big thing, but then there is still a lot that can be done in exploiting crowdfunding's potential as a huge leverage for sustainability and for transition. And if we look at the scope in Europe, we can see that there are many countries that have been more progressive than others in introducing measures. And we can think about tax reliefs or incentives for investors. You look at France and the renewable energy framework, and you see that even the promoter, if they are partly crowdfunding their project, they can get an incentive, so they get a better feed-in tariff to sell their green electricity. You can get a savings account in the UK and get tax reliefs, and there are so many best practices that can be done, and that could also use a bit of European harmonization. And then honestly, it's very hard to try to make them happen in any country specifically. And I always tend to believe that this kind of good practice, and even from the environmental perspective, always is a bit a push from the European Commission. So a lot of what is done, especially thinking about the Portuguese context, actually comes from a push given by the European Commission. And the other challenge, not only from the regulatory perspective, is also on the public sector. And there are also very different realities in Europe regarding this. Whereas, for example, you can look at the UK, which is definitely by far the biggest market in alternative finance in Europe, and you can have municipalities issuing bonds or debentures to have their investing or co-investing with the municipality in a solar power plant or in a biomass plant or whatever. Whenever we try to come to a Portuguese municipality with that approach, the first reaction tends to be something like, "Oh no, we would never ask for money from people. They will think we're bankrupt." And that shift in mindset, you're not asking for money. You're providing people with the opportunity to co-invest with you in something good, in creating a better environment for their own city. So I think there's also a long way in at local administration level that we can move forward. And as Philippe said, things won't happen and won't change if we can think of all at all levels and all different kinds of stakeholders.
And you made such a great example earlier before was about the communication, that people also start to be less afraid about what could be the reaction. Because if I look back in the beginning, especially how also ourselves hesitated to how is it about when there's anything negative in news to communicate, right? I mean, especially the startups, that was one of the biggest challenge for them to show that maybe their numbers didn't reach or whatever, and that actually people are much more open and understanding that things sometimes can either go different or wrong, and therefore if you communicate a lot, people are taken with and understand it. And this is also something in general that our societies, and thanks to social media and digitalization, it's becoming much more open. And when we look at the younger generation, like even Z and so on, who is coming, I mean, for them, they're sharing everything anytime anyway, right? And move on. And so this is a great opportunity to actually talk more about this whole thing and about the chances and risks. And the platforms can be a good, a good medium also for showcasing this.
Well,
just to add.
Yes, thank you. Nuno, Kristen, and Philip, you've really been very gracious this afternoon having us in your home and answering all of our questions. We've just got a minute or so to go. Is there anything, since we've been asking all the questions of you, is there anything you'd like to add as a final thought that you'd like to say? No need to, but I just want to give you the opportunity.
If I can jump into it just briefly. First of all, I hope there are a lot of policymakers also and other platforms, and everybody who wants to join ECN, please do so. It's a great community where it's a very open-minded set and great interaction. And I learned personally a lot since we founded 2013 over the journey. So it's a very great setting, and Oliver and Francesca and the team doing great work there. And besides, the policymakers here in the room, thank you for your support so far. And it's great to interact and to understand the practical challenges and maybe also understanding chances better. And let's work together, everybody, for making this possible to transition our economy to a greener one. And that was just maybe a few thoughts, no question, but just maybe an appel for working together more and more.
Well, you could hardly end on a better note than that, I think, Oliver, right? So I thank all of you very much. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Yes, thank you also for me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you for the opportunity and for choosing the topic, definitely.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think for this, it's then time to go into the wrap-up of the day.
So, what a day!
What a day! Yeah, I'd say so as well. I mean, thank you to everyone on the computer screen, I assume, or telephone, who has stayed with us all or some of the time. Thank you for the people that sent us questions and interacted with us. And thank you, most of all, of course, to all our speakers who contributed in I think, such a detailed and open way that may not always have, fit in perfectly, but it was a very nice exercise, I think, and was very deep learning. And thank you for Deloitte, of course, and the great team here, which are behind the next wall and who solved all the technical problems that you didn't even notice I had the screen.
And who were very much complimented today. And as much as Oliver and I wanted to take credit, we didn't take credit for it, did we?
No. So, but if we look back at the day, maybe just to really wrap up a few lessons we can take away, a few lessons learned, or things maybe to remember, is the European Commission is incredibly focused on developing tools and frameworks that work, that are developing a sustainable future, and that are open for the input from citizens and everyone else, industry, to help them understand the needs, and so we can have the proper framework that is actually enabling. And the European Parliament, as the check and control on the work of the European Commission, is very much involved. They are in constant discussions, they are not always in agreement, and also they reach out and they need our input. And so we are very, very lucky to have been able to be involved in some of the work, and we want to continue this together with our members and the industry at large in order to develop the framework for the crowdfunding industry, both within regards to regulation and other issues, but also within regard to sustainable finance. And then I think also for the discussion, we've clearly seen that we have platforms that are in the market, that are adaptive, that can react quickly, sometimes quicker than established organizations. And I think this gives us, a little bit of hope, and it's still small sector, but at times like this, are able to react and respond and actually carry a positive message also for a wider audience. So these are, I think, some things I would like to take away.
And real enthusiasm and strength, I'd say. I
think so as well, yes. So dedicated entrepreneurs at this stage, it's still all small companies. But tomorrow we have another day. We have a program tomorrow which will follow the same structure. We start at 1, we end at 4, plus minus. We will have 2 keynotes in the morning, and then in the beginning, and then a panel. The first, actually, we will have an external opening tomorrow from our partners Arte in Italy, who live stream this in Italian to the Italian market, who at the same time in the mornings of these days also run a conference on sustainable crowdfunding. So we are very happy to integrate this. So we will have the keynote tomorrow from Ellie Schlein, or the opening. There will be no questions for this. And then we have a keynote with your colleague Rafal from the Sustainable Finance team in Deloitte. Will give us an overview of where sustainable finance is and the latest developments really in the markets. And then we have another keynote from a renewable energy developer who finances projects through crowdfunding. So very, very interesting as well to have the project development side show how can crowdfunding finance sometimes larger projects as well, or co-finance them. And I think we will also hear some criticism of the industry, which is quite important. And then the panel tomorrow will be about what the European Investment Fund, as part of the European Investment Bank, and therefore also under the political influence of the European Commission, is doing in order to develop sustainable crowdfunding. And we have 2 great platforms there that will showcase how they work. So that's for the day tomorrow. Maybe the last thing I would like to say, and then I give you the last words, Ron, is what came to mind is when we talk about sustainable finance, because of course we talk about sustainability of our living condition, not of the earth or anything. They will continue without us, but of our living conditions and that of our children. And so the question between is crowdfunding good for sustainability or the other way around? Of course, it's the crowd that has the interest in sustainability, not the other way around. It's the crowd, it's the people that would sustain their life in the way they're used to, so they will invest in these projects through crowdfunding. I'm fairly convinced. Ron.
And I agree with that, and I think that this has been a very good conference, and there's still a lot more to come. And I hope everybody joins us tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll be here.
We will be here. Thank you very much, and goodbye.